Note: the following video contains discussion of sensitive subject material that some viewers may find upsetting. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello everybody and welcome to Comic Book Club. I am Octavia Schuyler, they them pronouns please. I'm here with my lovely co-host.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Weasel, and I can confirm Arby's did clog my toilet.
Okay.
All right, now.
Hello and welcome to the Comic Book Club podcast, a podcast where we read comic books and then talk about it. Today we will be looking at the popular Watchmen by Alan Moore, and since this was the Weasel's pick, I will let him do the rest of the description.
All right, so Watchmen was developed in 1985 by Alan Moore, illustrated by Dave Gibbons. It was sort of one of the big revolutionary comics. That, alongside such comics as like The Dark Knight Returns, it's one of like the few comic books to actually like break into like the mainstream like novel sphere, and is widely regarded to be one of the greatest American novels of the 1900s.
It was
It
was like the first to be deconstructive of the medium.
Yeah. Not necessarily the first to be deconstructive, but the first to like deconstruct the thing as a whole. Like I think Stan Lee started off the deconstruction back in the 60s, but Watchmen is like a real like gets deep into everything.
Right.
It's the first like superhero. Yep.
How is Stan Lee deconstructive? Because I've got like I don't have it with me. It's we moved, and unfortunately I lost a couple of comics back at the old house, but at my old house I have like a complete collection of like or not a complete collection, but a huge collection of like the original Thor comics, The Journey into Mystery. I shared them with you in high school. They were kind of seemed very generic.
Well, the thing is, generic back in the 60s is like a how do I describe it? It's like a not like a general term, but like it's a bit misleading, because the thing about most comic books at the time was it was all about like take a look at the DC heroes. They're like characters that their powers are like their character, and they're held up as shining examples. Stan Lee was the first one to like make superheroes feel like real people, and in a way that does deconstruct the genre. Like Spider-Man, he's got like these powers, but he's also like some like kid who is irresponsible, and he ends up like getting his like uncle killed or whatever. And then he got like the Fantastic Four, and they're like their powers sort of like complement each other, but they also like can't stand living together. It's like a sitcom.
Yeah,
and Stan Lee was like, Stan Lee. I'd argue that it's somewhat of a deconstruction of the genre that Stan Lee did, but he didn't intend it that way. He just wanted to write stories, and that's great. But
yeah, the only thing off the top of, and I am talking from like a bit of a limited perspective. I only recently got into comics, and again, I'm only speaking from like the Thor comics mostly.
All right.
I've got other stuff, but it's mostly just Thor because that was my entry point. Like, from my experience, like, the only character I really found that was sort of deconstructive was, like, Deadpool. Because he was kind of like the wild card of just out there, like, not a villain, not a hero, and not like one of those gloomy anti-heroes.
Yeah, well, actually, that's like a deconstruction of a deconstruction. And actually, Watchmen itself is, like, what Deadpool was deconstructing. Like Rorschach in particular, he's actually meant to be a deconstruction of both like superheroes in general, and specifically modeled after like the 30s pulp novel heroes. Take like the original Green Hornet or the Shadow.
I didn't realize comics went back that far.
Comics go back to like probably like the 20s or 30s. I think like the 30s mainly.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've gotten a little off topic because.
Of course. This is Off Topic, the podcast. I forgot. So, Watchmen. It's It's a nice little book about a nice man named the Comedian, and he falls off a building, and his buddies are trying to figure out what happened.
Yeah, and do you want to do how we
All the
got in?
while getting off topic throughout that. So you know what? This blends in.
Yeah.
It aligns perfectly. I designed it this way. I'm a genius. All right. What were you gonna say?
Do you want to do the how we got into it?
Sure. Yeah. How'd you get into it?
Well, you just recommended it to me, so
There you go. All right. How did I get into it?
Oh, hold on. I got a door. Someone knocking at the door. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Sorry about that, cutout listeners. Long story short, my maintenance guy came by to fix some outlets, and we had to turn the power off, so we got disconnected. But we're back. Where we left off was how we got into this. And...
I blame Robert Redford.
I don't know who that is.
Did you read the comic book?
Yes, I did. Robert.
He's the dude that they talk about at the end that's running for president.
Oh, I must have forgotten about that. That was such a minute detail.
Yeah, but it works a lot better in the movie, honestly, because like the whole point of it was like it was supposed to be like Ronald Reagan.
Mm. Yeah.
So blame Reagan. But
right. So I just got into
right.
this because when I suggested doing this podcast, this was the first thing you wanted to do. So how did you get into it?
So I got into this because of a little web series called
Just Some Random Guy.
Oh,
it's Happy Hour.
Just Some Random Guy, the Rorschach and Deadpool stuff, and those videos in particular, I saw those back when I was like 12, I want to say. They were the first things to introduce me to the concept of like Watchmen, because like the movie was like out at the time and it was somewhat popular when it came out.
Yeah. Oh, he's
like I remember.
Yeah. He's updating regularly now. Like he went on a hiatus for a while, but actually I think just today or yesterday he posted like he's doing this like Captain America series right now. I haven't finished watching his like he did a Deadpool Rorschach. He just finished up a Deadpool Rorschach storyline. I haven't finished watching that, and he's now doing like a Captain America Man Out of Time with the Infinity Stones thing. I have not started watching that. It's on my to watch list. But yeah, he's updating regularly now.
All right, that's neat. Yeah, but that was how I got introduced to the characters, and then like many years later, when I grow from a wide-eyed boy to a depressed man, I look on my on-demand, and I'm like, oh wait a minute, there's that Watchmen movie everybody was talking about a while ago. I want to watch that, and then it was the best thing I ever watched. And then I'm like, you know what? I got to get the comic, and then I got the comic book. It's like the third or fourth best thing I've ever read, and yeah, that's how I got into Watchmen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard about the movie. I heard about I think the first time I heard about the franchise in general was also from Just Some Random Guy's videos, but I didn't feel I heard briefly what it was about. Well, actually that's not true. Nobody ever actually told me what it was about. I just knew that it was kind of infamous for being very dark and very gritty, and I was like, basically, and actually, I mean, it is very dark and it is very gritty and it's morally ambiguous, but there's a lot more to it than that. Like, everybody always just talks about how dark it is. It's like, yeah, it's dark, but that's not the main feature about it. Like, I feel like just having it known for being dark is kind of doing it a disservice.
Well, I think I honestly agree with the whole sentiment that it's dark, because that, I think, is what made it unique from other comic books at the time. Because like I was talking about, like a lot of other comic books are a lot more like, especially DC in particular, is a lot more like not flawless superheroes, but like superheroes that you look up to. And Watchmen in particular portrayed superheroes in this like really realistic kind of way, like crossing paths with like actual history and like actual like real world politics of the time.
Yeah, and that's what I'm
like,
talking. Yeah. Oh, that's what I'm talking about. But like the way people described it, I got the idea that it was just like essentially misery porn. You know,
that's Spawn for you.
That's another thing I've heard of, but don't know anything about.
That's another thing we got to read. Anyway, Watchmen.
I don't know. Watchmen. So yeah, so that's how we got into it, and I think did we do the brief summary?
I believe we did the brief summary. Something about the comedian and his buddies want to know what happened to him.
Yeah, the comedian got killed, and now basically everybody.
Oh, spoilers!
Well,
Jeez,
that's in the very first panel, and you already said that.
that's true.
Or not the very first panel, but the
I
very
said he
first
fell off
page.
a building. I didn't say he died. Flashback to when I actually said he died. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right.
So the comedian was a part of this superhero group that's pretty much, most of them are all now retired, and he gets murdered, and this kicks off a series of events of people trying to figure out why he was murdered, as well as just in an increasing political climate, and everybody's worried that World War III is about to happen. So that is your spoiler-free summary and everything. If you don't want spoilers, now is the time to leave. Do we want to do our recommendation?
Yeah, I'll do my recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all right. Read this book. I don't care what you're doing. I don't care if you got like 6 kids to take care of and you got to work like 80 a week. You read this novel. You get out there. You spend $30 on like how much was this comic book that I got here? It was like, yeah, it was like, oh my god, it was $20. It's cheap. Go get it.
Mine was
Get this
$25.
Oh well, what, did you get like the hard copy?
No, I just went in. I think mine was $25. I don't. Then again, I do live in a state that doesn't have sales tax, so.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
So I think the prices might be a little higher where I live because we don't have sales tax. I remember when I visited you for vacation, everything seemed a lot cheaper until we added the sales tax. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
All
right.
My recommendation.
So, all right. Sorry. Go ahead.
My recommendation is I do. This was a very good book. I did enjoy reading it. However, I would not recommend it for anyone younger than say 18. Because I know when I was younger, we read a book. I think it was called The Things They Carried. It was about like this Vietnam veteran.
Yeah.
And I think I might want to reread that. But the thing is, a lot of that just went over my head because I was reading it when I was like 11 for school. And a lot of it went over my head, and I ended up really hating the book, and I just was disgusted by it. And I think if you gave this to, like, 12-year-old me, I would have been bored, I wouldn't have understood it or anything like that. It would have just...
Yeah, I can agree with that, because I remember this movie came out, I was like 10 or something, and I remember my uncle was trying to watch it a lot, like rent it from like Blockbuster or whatever. Mm-hmm. But like, yeah, if I watched it back then, I definitely wouldn't have got it.
Yeah.
I probably would have enjoyed it, I just wouldn't have got it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have enjoyed this when I was younger. I mean, obviously it's not marketed for kids, but even if you're like in your 20s, I would say wait till you're at a point where wait till you're like decently well read to read it. Otherwise, you're gonna miss a lot of it. And I'm
not well read at all, and I enjoyed the hell out of this novel.
I don't know. I think you and I are probably more well read than we give ourselves credit for.
I exclusively read comic books. I don't read regular books. Regular books are for nerds.
No, I'm including comics in that. I don't think just because comics are comics, I don't think they're a lesser art form. So even if you only read comics, I think you and I both read a lot of comics. But yeah,
I do read a lot of comics. That is a true fact about me.
Yeah, I would just wait till you've kind of had a mature enough taste for it, because otherwise you're probably gonna just be like how I was when I was younger, which was just being disgusted and confused by everything. I remember I hated the Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame when I was younger for the same reason. It just freaked me out, and I hated it.
Yeah, I never saw it.
It's a decent movie. It's got its flaws, but overall, I would recommend it. Just, again, probably not to anyone younger than 15.
Yeah, not a big Disney fan. All right, should we get into spoilers now?
Yeah, now we're in spoilers. Okay, since...
All right, get out of here!
Yeah, you've had your warning. All right, since this is your pick, do you want to choose which point to go over first?
Yeah, so literally everything is the first thing that I wrote on here, because this is,
Oh, are you in this document at the same time?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, that's why my thing's showing up, yeah.
Yeah, that's... Okay, yeah.
Because like the great thing about this novel is like the way it's so like intricately developed. It's almost like every single detail just like plays off of each other. Even like little things that you probably didn't notice the first time reading. Like when I first read this, I thought that it was like, all right, they're just making up the story as they go along or whatever. And then the second time I read it, it's like, oh, okay, wait a minute, now that makes sense because they're talking about this, and this comes into play like 3 issues down the line, and then this goes into that.
Yeah.
And it's like it just like the more it's definitely one of the type of graphic novels that you got to like reread to kind of understand because like once you know what's happening the second time around, you're like, all right, that's what's going on. That's what makes it good.
Yeah, admittedly I've only read it once, but I do have a pretty good memory, so I do know what you're talking about. Like, admittedly, I was flipping a little bit ahead to see just how many pages it was, so I could track my progress. And I saw Rorschach without his mask early on, and I kind of connected that Rorschach was the guy who came to the newsstand with the end is nigh sign. And I was like, and knowing that as I was reading is like, oh, this is kind of depressing now. I kind of feel bad for Rorschach. Oh, and before I forget, I remember in one of these points you said, you say Rorschach is a deranged sociopath. He is not a sociopath. I'm not an expert in psychology.
Sure about that? Hold up. No, because I'm pretty sure he's like a textbook sociopath, and that's one of the reasons why I like the character. But
no, I don't think it's. I think Ozymandias is a sociopath.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely. He's also. I think most of these heroes are sociopaths, and that's one of the reasons why the novel works the way it does. But
the thing is, I think Rorschach just has PTSD and depression. I don't think he's a sociopath.
I don't think he's got like depression. I think he's definitely got PTSD, but
no depression when he's looking at the Rorschach test cards, like where the ink blot
test
and everything's that's a sign of depression.
I don't think that's I think it's more like nihilism than it is depression. I mean, he doesn't seem to be like a his whole
nihilism is a philosophy. Nihilism
exactly. That's what I mean. Like he's led to like maybe not like a nihilistic philosophy. He's got a black and white philosophy.
Yeah. About
like morality, but that comes from like an inherent like nihilism or nihilistic sense that he has.
I kind of disagree with that. Nihilism is the belief that nothing matters.
Exactly.
And I don't think he seems to. I think Rorschach puts more meaning into everything than.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He forces his meaning onto like society. That's like his mask is like white and black, and it like never mixes because he's like the world. I don't think he's the one who said this, but there was some like I'm thinking of The Dark Knight Returns right now, but there was a line from that was like, the world only makes sense if you force it to. And Rorschach actually himself was based a lot on the character that said that, Batman.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to pull my nose. But no, I mean, I'd have to look up this definition of sociopath again, but I'm pretty sure Rorschach.
I got it right now.
Or not the definition, but Rorschach definitely does suffer depression, though.
Yeah.
Like, again, the ink blot test, looking at everything, he's instantly associates it with, like, pessimism. And I know I've dealt with depression throughout my life. I'm not sure if you want me to talk about your mental health, so I'm gonna leave that to you to talk about.
Yeah. Like, I think we both suffered from depression. I think that's, like, sort of obvious, but... I mean, like, maybe not obvious if you know us, I guess. But, yeah, like, Rorschach, he's got, like, I guess he's got depression, but, like,
well, if you've got PTSD, you've almost certainly got depression. But, yeah, the fact that he's, like he sees just ink blots and thinks of this graphic, gory image of a dog, with its head split open. That's generally, like, one of the main things about depression is it's kind of, I remember, I was listening to somebody who also suffered from depression. I'm not going to mention their name, but they were saying living with depression is sometimes like being in a dark road with your headlights on, and all you see in front of you is broken glass and nails and filth. And it's like, logically, you know, outside the beam of your light, there's more than just broken glass and filth. But that's all you can see right now, and so sometimes, you know, that's why people end up in suicidal states of mind. It's because that's all you can see right now, and the logical brain part of your brain is screaming at you, but it can't be heard because it's kind of locked away somewhere, which is...
Or they end up just putting on a trench coat and then breaking people's fingers in a bar.
Yeah.
But
I think the other thing was that I didn't think Rorschach was a sociopath is because he has such a black and white, because he does have some morality, and that still is based off of like in the in the random guy videos, like the first like crossover where they do like the PC Mac parody commercial, and Deadpool says, "Yeah, what do you do?" And he's like, "I punish those who harm the innocent." It's like, yeah, I don't think a sociopath would care about that. Sociopaths, like Loki, old version Loki, not modern version Loki, the older versions of Loki was definitely a sociopath who was just out for himself and entirely self-serving. I don't think a sociopath would dedicate himself to, you know, stopping rapists and whatnot. And also, I kind of agree with what Rorschach's doing. Like, I mean, yeah, he's psychotic and he's kind of out of control, but it's like, he's killing rapists and murderers. It's kind of like, I mean, I feel like getting mad at him, it's like, yeah, it's kind of like getting mad at somebody for punching a Nazi. It's like, no, I kind of agree with you. Go ahead and do that.
Yeah, but Rorschach definitely is, he's definitely, like, one of those, like, characters that's, like, he definitely goes a bit too far in a lot of his places, and he was intentionally designed to be that way, but...
I don't know.
He's definitely one of those characters that's, like, you agree with him.
Yeah.
Like, even if you don't agree with his methods, or you don't agree with, like, anything outside of,
actually,
like, what he does.
I never really had a problem with his methods, mainly because they were directed at horrible people. It's like, yeah, I don't care.
Well, yeah.
Punch.
Yeah, it's the same thing with, like, heroes like the Punisher, who are, like, also have very, like, very sick methods, but, like...
Yeah.
Yeah, Rorschach in particular, I think he was, like, one of the first, like, big ones, or at least one of the first ones to, like, show how far something like that could go. And as he was designed by Alan Moore himself, he was supposed to be, like, you were supposed to look at him not as, like, a hero, but as, like, a broken man.
Yeah, he would
that, like, does horrible things because of that.
Yeah, I definitely do get the sense that he's, like, very broken, but at the same time, it's kind of like... I don't know. I do kind of think he's a hero. I do think he also is a man in desperate need of help. He kind of reminds me...
Oh, yeah.
I haven't watched this show yet. It's again on my to-watch list. Have you heard of a show called Broadchurch?
Broadchurch? No.
Okay, well, it's on my... Again, I haven't watched it, but I did watch, like... I've watched clips of it and trailers for it, and... Basically, the premise is about these cops in Britain who, like, I think they work in Scotland Yard, and it's basically their job as cops to go out and, you know, solve crimes and stuff. It's a murder mystery. And, like, the main character, Alec Hardy, is kind of like a... He kind of reminded me of Rorschach a little, but he was, Alec Hardy... I watched a 12-minute montage. I think the video is called, like, Alec Hardy being a mood for 12 minutes straight, and that's how I became aware of the show. And it's basically, Alec Hardy is autistic. Nobody seems to realize that. Again, haven't watched the show. Maybe they actually talk about it in the show, but it's very clear just by watching him that he's autistic. He doesn't pick up on social cues at all. He's very blunt. He's very much like Sheldon, where he'll just say whatever he thinks, and, you know, it's like, oh, well, you know, I was just saying the truth. I was saying what needed to be said. And it's like, yeah, but you're being kind of an a-hole. And he also very clearly suffers from depression and anxiety, because it's very clear that his autism has not been diagnosed. And so the end result of that is that he's very, from what I can tell, it's like he's very smart, and again, I haven't watched the show. he's very smart and he can see things and make connections that other people can't, but he's also kind of a complete and utter mess because it's like, he's got autism, he's got depression, and depression to the point where it's like, I think he needs to be hospitalized, because in that 12-clip montage I was watching, there's a moment where his friend comes to, like, pick him up for something, and his living space is just a complete mess. Like, there's dirty dishes and dirty stuff everywhere. And the entire scene, he's making, like, a cup of tea, but the tea's been sitting out for, like, hours. The milk, he actually has to sniff it to see if it's bad, and it's kind of like a shrug. It's like, yeah, and he keeps refusing food, so it's like, I'm pretty sure he's starving himself, which is a form of self-harm, which is incredibly dangerous. Like, he's literally killing himself and he needs help. And reading through, to get back on topic, reading through Watchmen, looking at Rorschach, I was kind of reminded of him, because Alec Hardy definitely isn't as extreme as this. Like, he's not going out and breaking people's fingers. He's kind of from what I saw, he's kind of like more so a puppy dog, and more so just a very rude and says whatever the hell he wants. But I was kind of reminded that it seemed more of like a dialed up version of that.
Yeah.
I forgot what my original point was. Okay, well, could you repeat the last thing you said about Rorschach, because that kind of getting cut a little and I couldn't hear you very well.
How can I repeat it? I'm saying it right now. Anyway, yeah, Rorschach is the morally correct Watchman. Anyway,
yeah, I'd agree with that statement. He's getting things done. Do we want to curse in this podcast?
Yes. I don't care.
Okay. There might be cursing in this podcast, so warning now.
Let's do it.
All right. The next thing.
Nipple. Anyway.
Actually, that reminds me, I was looking through transgender memes, and one of them was like, hey, can we change sex reassignment surgery to yeet teat?
Yeah, alright. I think we might get a little off topic here.
Yeah.
You want to talk about the art style now?
Oh, yeah. I've got down here written art style. I really liked this. Like, it definitely seems like it came from the older era of comics. Like, it was reminding...
like the pulps.
Like what?
The pulps. Those are the comic books of, like, the 30s and 40s. That's how they're referred to. But,
okay.
It's definitely got, like, a very, like, because of ink limitations at the time. This was written in 1985.
Right.
Back then, it's like you only had, like, a limited amount of colors to use. It's not like it is now.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Where you have you can just put it on your little Apple computer, and then it's like, okay, now I got a page. It was like you had to sketch it out, and then you had to like ink it so that it would like
show up the
way it is. Yeah.
Like actually, there's a scene in the thingy where they talk about how Dr. Manhattan's blue skin is like too light to really show up on the TV, and he darkens it. That was kind of funny.
Yeah. Actually, the funny thing about this comic book is that a lot of comic books at the time, they would use like red, blues, and greens to or like the primary colors. I think it's red, blue, and yellow might be, but
red, blue, and yellow.
Yeah, Watchmen in particular is unique because a lot of its color scheme has more of like the secondary colors, like the greens and like purple and orange.
Yeah.
And that was also meant to be like subversive of like what you expect from comic books, and it gives it its own like unique look because of it.
There's also a surprising amount of pink in here.
Yeah, like a lot of the secondary colors. There's like a lot of pink. There's a lot of like orange. A lot of Yeah,
I'm actually fairly impressed. I do art myself. I draw. I'm actually writing a comic book right now.
All right.
And I was actually impressed of how they got away with using these neon colors, because a lot of the times it's very hard to use neon colors in any high amount because usually it starts to get like become an eyesore. It starts to hurt your eyes, like if you look at a bright light too long.
Yeah.
So I was actually fairly impressed that they were able to have this many colors this bright and still be able to make it work.
Yeah, that's also kind of a classic noir thing too, is like the contrasting like bright colors with like dark colors like black and that
Yeah.
allows it to like seamlessly like blend together and like shows off like the grittiness of like whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Watchmen
Hmm.
draws a lot of inspiration from like comic books of like all different eras, like a little bit from like the Golden Age, a little bit from the Silver Age. It's
Hmm.
yeah, it's definitely Alan Moore like understood comic books, and that's why he was
Yeah.
able to deconstruct it so well. And
Yeah.
the
I was
art
actually
style, yeah, and the art style itself like shows that.
Yeah. I was actually talking to when I bought this comic, I was talking to the comic book lady or the lady at the comic book shop. She was saying that actually Alan Moore is famous for like writing a huge amount of detail for like a single frame or panel. Is like,
Yeah,
oh, this waitress, like giving away an entire waitress's backstory for when she's only in there for like one panel. So,
yeah.
or something I was going to say. I really do like the covers. This seems to be something of a bit of a habit of mine. Is every time I pick up like a comic, it's like, oh my god, the cover is like really gorgeous. I hope the art inside it's like just like the same. It's like, nope.
Yep.
I was specifically disappointed with this with the Jessica Jones comics because the Jessica Jones comics have these gorgeous watercolor, these gorgeous covers done in watercolor, but the inside is kind of like the noir, whatchamacallit? It's more noir and it's
Yeah,
more
the
realistic.
noir,
Yeah.
yeah.
The
Well, I
only
mean, that makes sense just because it's more of like a detective comic book, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure.
Oh yeah, it
Right.
is. And
Yeah.
also it's just easier to watercolors can watercolors can take a long time to draw, and they can also it's because it's watercolor, it can be a little hard to scan and put up depending on how good your technology is and how good your artist is.
Yeah.
I think the only last thing I wanted to say about the art style in particular is I was trying to figure out, like, I was thinking while I was reading this that if I was doing this, I would have done. I haven't read this comic, but I've heard of it, Sin City, where it's entirely in black and
Yeah.
white except for a
That
few striking colors. And I was thinking, is like, that's kind of part of what I was expecting, considering the genre. Like, I was expecting it to be all black and white except for, bright blood red when that showed up. Or maybe be like it was in the first few panels where it was with the comedian's death where it's all black and red. That's kind of
Yeah.
what I was expecting, but it was not. Do we feel like there would have been any benefit from doing the art style differently, or do we
Oh
just
no,
like
definitely
this
not. The way it is, it's like perfect for what it's going for and like what it's trying to achieve, both in terms of like artistic vision and in terms of narrative.
Yeah.
So I definitely wouldn't see how you could draw this any other way.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, moving on to a similar but different point. The way the panels are set up, like the pose and the shot. One thing I noticed and was actually really impressed with is, like, from panel to panel, it can be entirely different. Like, I've got it open to just like page number 10 where the comedian's getting thrown out of the window, and it's like, even though like from panel to panel it's all completely different, you can still tell what's going on. That was something I really appreciated, and that's actually something I learned because, as I said, I'm trying to do my own comic, and that was something I learned, is that I can actually, it is possible to not just have to not just have like a panel be subtly different. I mean, that is good. Like, there are like, again, in my Jessica Jones comic books, there are a lot of pages where the expression is only slightly different from panel to panel, which kind of slows the pace down. But this was actually different. It's very different panel to panel, and actually I think that helps it read quicker.
Yeah,
If you know what I mean.
a lot of that. Yeah, a lot of that has also had to do with like the panels are structured. They were structured in a very specific way. It was like a
Yeah, like
3x3 structure. There's like yeah, there's like 9 panels like per page really, and like how they use those panels is up to whatever they're going for at the time. Like there's a lot.
And
It's supposed to
anytime there's
feel like
something
yeah, you're talking about how it's easy to read. It's supposed to feel like clockwork because one of the main themes of Watchmen is definitely clocks. Like you can see every the beginning of every issue, there's like a clock that's like slowly counting down to midnight, and that's like just sums up one of the whole themes of like the novel in general. Is like time and time running out, and like
Yeah, because they're on a
and like the
they're on
yeah.
a deadline to try and figure out. That didn't strike me at first. Like, it was only until I was I was wondering why the clock was there, but as I kind of read further, I realized, oh, this is why there's a clock there. It's counting down to this one specific event, which is
Yeah.
when Ozymandias not completely, destroys half of New York City with a alien bomb thing.
He unleashes Tentacruel onto the city of New York.
Tentacruel, use tidal wave.
And he uses
effective.
die after 3 seconds. That's what it does. Dies
Right.
after 3 seconds.
Right. Okay. Do we want to talk more about the panels? I think that was kind of
Yeah, I think basically I kind of want to talk about the shots though, because like
Okay.
a lot of the way like these panels are designed, like the characters' positioning is very like important to like what they're trying to go for. Like one of my favorite panels is like towards the end of, I believe it is chapter, I'm looking for it right now. Chapter 9 looks like. It's
Which
the one
page?
where this would be, well, chapter 9. It starts at page like 281 or whatever, but the panel that I'm talking about specifically is like page when it looks like 30, I'm gonna say 307, like all three
Okay.
panels there, where it's just like it's like a pan up shot, panel to panel, of like moving away from the planet that they're on, and the fact
Ooh,
that
of
they're
the
like
307 you said? Oh yeah.
307, yeah, and
Oh,
you
where
see
we
like
zoom away from the smiley face on the
the smiley face on Mars, and that just like sums up the whole plot of that chapter, where it's like destiny and like the coincidence of events and like how they all unfold into specific moments. And I remember first.
I don't think they were talking about destiny. I think they were just talking
Sorry, go
about
ahead.
chance. Because destiny is usually like everything, like
Yeah,
que sera, sera, all that will be, what will be, will be.
Well, exactly. That's what Dr. Manhattan's whole thing is like there's no such thing as
choice.
Things. Yeah, there's no such thing as choice. It's all an illusion because time is just constantly happening. Like he has the line in here, we're all puppets. I'm just a puppet that can see the strings.
Yeah.
So like everybody else is living like in the moment, and Dr. Manhattan is the only person that can like see outside of that moment and see like every moment all at once.
Yeah.
And the fact that like
I don't know how I feel about that. I've always hated like the concept of prophecy in book, because I used to read I've kind of left the fandom now, but I used to read this series. It's the Warrior Cats series, and one of the things that constantly frustrated me was that they had prophecies. Like, it was very much a fantasy of a bunch of these cats that lived in clans, and like kind of a pseudo political. I want to I'm kind of hesitating to call it political, because as much as politics was involved in it, it was. It's hard to describe, but basically it's about these cats that live in clans, and, they're constantly at war with each other. And one of the things I really hated is that they had prophecies and ancestors. Like, they could communicate with their ancestors, and their ancestors would give them prophecies, and the cats would really never know what the prophecies meant until, like, after the fact. Or it would be, like, ridiculously obvious. It's like, why do you need to frickin' say that? And, like, the whole idea of, like, well, if you couldn't understand the prophecy until after the fact, what's the point of having the prophecy in the first place? And that's like the same thing with like Chosen One storylines. Like, I'm personally very opposed to the idea. Like, even if we do finally figure out that, like, oh, choice is an illusion, everything's predetermined. Like, even if you can prove that, it's like, okay, but I think that should be one of those things that we kind of ignore. Like, we all know that true love kind of doesn't exist, but it's also one of the things that's like, we should probably forget that we know that. Like, we should still, like, perfection is impossible, and we need to understand that and take that to heart, but we should still strive for perfection. Otherwise, everything's just gonna fall apart and we're all gonna be miserable.
Yeah, but I don't think Dr. Manhattan is really about, like, the thing about Dr. Manhattan in particular, and what makes him so unique of a superhero, is, like, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, like, based him off of, like, actual quantum physics. Like, the reason that he's blue is because of, like, the material that he's made out of. It's, like, the color of, like, electrons or whatever that he's made out of, that the color of that is blue. And
cool.
The reason why he views time that way is because, like, that's how I'm trying to read an article right now and try to explain this, but
an article on
basically
physics?
The way, like, there are, like, light waves or whatever that, like, yeah, like, you can take, like, two different wavelengths and then, like, a lot more things. I'm trying to figure this out right now. It's this phenomena, like a diffraction, where it's like, if a wave goes through two narrow slits, it creates interference patterns, and instead of having a single wave, you get this very complicated pattern.
Right.
Yeah, I can barely decipher this. Basically, the whole point of Dr. Manhattan, it's not necessarily prophecy. It's more just so, like, quantum, like, when I think Destiny was just like a failure in the English language for me, because it's more of like a pattern that's just constantly, like, you ever hear the theory that time is a flat circle, where it's
time
like
is a flat. No.
Yeah, like,
I'm kind of thinking of Doctor Who. Time is a
Yeah.
wibbly wobbly ball of stuff that is constant and never changing.
Yeah, the concept of, like, time is a flat circle is that time isn't changing. It's like we're just going to be destined to keep repeating the same events over and over again for the rest of eternity, because, like, time is not necessarily predetermined, but, well, yeah, predetermined, I guess, would be the word for it. Like, it's not like Rorschach was destined to do this, or Ozymandias was destined to do that. I am Dr. Manhattan, I have spoken. It's more like, this is how the events are gonna go. There's nothing we can do to change it. I'm witnessing it. Like, I'm witnessing all this happening at the same time as I'm witnessing this happening, like, 30 years into the past. And it's like,
right.
It's just a straight arrow, and there's no way to divert from that. Like, it's all, like, quantum physics.
I think,
yeah,
I don't know. I think that's where I haven't studied like science like that.
I'm no expert in the field either, but I know that there's a lot of, like, crazy stuff out there. Like, there's, like, quarks or whatever that, like, experience time like another half a minute as we do. So it's like
you keep hitting that button.
I think I'm not hitting the button, actually. I have no idea what it is, honestly.
Go.
But, like, it's like a...
Yeah,
like, you know, the whole concept of, like, time dilation and how, like, gravity affects the flow of space-time? And, like...
No, not really. The only thing I can think of is, like, how, I remember in chemistry class we were talking about how electrons jump from one ring to another. They were saying that, like, he was saying, like, they do it so, like, they don't actually... They basically teleport, like, for a blip in time, that electron doesn't exist until it reappears in, like, the next higher ring when the atom gets charged.
Exactly, and that's partly how Dr. Manhattan's teleportation works as well.
Oh, yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that all of Dr. Manhattan's, like, powers and everything he can do is all based off of quantum physics. Like, the whole intrinsic field generator that rips him apart in the first place is, like, it rips apart his atoms, like, the electrons from his atoms, and, like, tears him apart from that level. And the only reason that he's able to put himself back together is because he understands how those atoms work.
Right, to him it's like Tinker Toys.
Yeah, like he was a watchmaker growing up, so like, he knows about, like, assembling something in a specific sequence, and because he's also a scientist, how to, like, turn that into a human body or whatever, and that's how he figures out how to control matter itself.
Right. Yeah.
But Sorry, go ahead.
I was saying, actually, the segues. I don't have this point written down. I was thinking of saving it for a different comic, but I guess we'll bring it up now. I was thinking about, like, because I won't, not a lot of comics, but I do, movies and stuff and TV shows. A lot of the times, and I find this happening, is that they kind of get consumed by their lore and their world building. Like,
Yeah.
it gets, like, it's, we lose focus and we're just like, I would like to build this world and explain this person's superhero powers. I remember in the Jessica Jones Netflix series, which I hate, and I'll talk about that in the next episode because we're doing Alias next. In that episode, throughout that series, they constantly are trying to explain the villain Kilgraves, which is a dumb name and I hate it. They're constantly explaining and elaborating on his powers when they don't need to do that. And actually, they really screw it up at one point because they say that he emits a virus when it's not even a virus, it's a pheromone. He emits a pheromone, which a pheromone is, something where he basically emits it and people breathe it in and it immediately affects the behavior of those around him of the same species. That's what a pheromone is. But they specifically say a virus, which is not how viruses work. Viruses do not activate instantly, and and most viruses actually, since we've got vaccines and stuff, die on humans within a couple of hours. Like, a lot of people think rats are disgusting, like pet rats, but it's like, actually, most diseases that are on your pet rats will die on a human within, like, 3 hours, so they're not really that. But my point with that is, because they explained it so much, number one, they effed it up completely to the point where his powers are nonsensical. Like, if it's a matter of breathing something in like a pheromone, all they had to do was wear a gas mask and they'd be completely immune to him. And because they explained it to death, it didn't make sense. It was distracting for another thing, because we kept having to take a moment to explain this thing. And it was just a complete mess. They handled it incredibly poorly. And so I was thinking, like, your world building and your lore should kind of act like the frosting and the toppings on your cake. Like, they can make that much better, but if you go overboard with it, it kind of ruins the whole thing and just makes it, it distracts from the main point of it, which is, in this case, I would say your story and your characters are like the main thing that drives any novel. Hey.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I like about, like, in particular, though, and, well, not with Dr. Manhattan, but, like, Watchmen in particular, in general, is its world building. It's the fact that this whole world, I know that later on in here we're going to be talking about the, so I was talking about the, how at the end of each issue they have those, like, little 6-page, like, articles that expand the lore. And what I like about Watchmen is, like, it doesn't, like, the Marvel universe in particular, especially even like the Netflix universe, that all is grounded on like comic book science that was designed in like the 60s, or I mean going back even to like the 40s, so it's got to build off that. But Watchmen was designed like from the ground up to be this limited series that, while has room for expansion, does not warrant expansion. Like, you could, like, there's a lot of like series like before Watchmen and like the Doomsday Clock that go more into the Watchmen universe and how that's designed, or like how events unfold in that universe. But you could literally just read Watchmen and you could get everything that the universe has to offer and not look at anything, and it's like you got enough world building there. It's like an RPG game in that sense.
Yeah, that was actually the thing I liked about this, is because the world building, it was done, there is a lot of world building, but it's not like they never stop and they never have to stop and like really take a paragraph to explain something. They just kind of, it's show don't tell. You actually watch it happen.
Exactly.
And that's something that's like something I really appreciate. It's like in Logan, the movie. I haven't watched that in a while. I actually own that DVD, but I haven't watched it in a while. They kind of, it starts in media res. We don't have any setup, we don't have an explanation. They never really stop to explain what's going on. but it's told in a way where you can still keep up with it. And that was actually the thing that I was saying that I liked, is that this doesn't overdo it. There is world
Yeah.
building, but we don't overdo it, and you don't need to overdo it. Like, I'm very much of the opinion that, like, if your audience doesn't need to know something in order to understand what's going on, you probably shouldn't be bringing it up, or just, have it in the background. Because, like, again, I've seen, like, a couple of TV shows where they just got consumed by their lore, and it just got boring because we were constantly just explaining stuff. It's like, this is why fictional field guides exist. And even with those, like, articles, like those in-universe articles, I didn't like those, admittedly. I've got that in my point of things I didn't like. Mainly just because they felt unnecessary, which I do guess, looking back, you don't need to read them to know what's going on, so if you were bored with them like me, you can just skip them.
Yeah.
But I do see, actually, the merit, because it does feel very much like they were written by the characters they're written by, and they would, I think they would, like, the original Night Owl's autobiography. Like, that's a well-written autobiography. It's just, that's not why I came to this comic. I didn't come to this comic to read a bunch of documents. I came to this comic because I wanted, well, I came to this comic because you recommended it, but,
Well, yeah.
Somebody opening this up and reading it would probably be here for, like, a good, decent mystery, which is primarily what this is.
But what I like about like the autobiography part in general is that it also tells a story that, like, the novel itself doesn't even get into,
Right.
which is the story of, like, the Minutemen, like the team before the Watchmen, and, like, how they started, how they affected history, like what happened to them. And I think, like while I agree you don't necessarily have to read it, I kind of miss, like, what the whole universe is about, like, by skipping those novels, because, like, it just, like, builds up on the world and builds up on the themes of the novel in general.
It gives you context for everything.
Yeah, definitely a lot more context, and definitely it's just got some interesting lore on its own. Like, I'm talking about before Watchmen, there's an entire miniseries in that grand series just dedicated to the Minutemen and, like, how they interacted during their primes, like Hooded Justice and, like, the original Night Owl, Silk Spectre, all these characters, and, like, how they actually, like, contrast with the main Watchmen characters as a result, and, like, how the world builds up from that. It also, like, contextualizes it in, like, history, because, like, the minute, like, when the Minutemen start, the date that the Minutemen start is, like, they're around like this same date that, like, superhero comics started existing. Like, they talk about in the comic book, the reason Night Owl was inspired a lot by Superman, the comic books, and the Batman comic books, and they were, like, fresh when the Minutemen started. And it also talks about, like, how because superheroes existed in real life, those comics died out of popularity. And that's why you got, like, that pirate comic throughout the novel, the Tales of the Black Freighter.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a
lot
more...
That was something I did...
Sorry, go ahead.
The Tales of the Black Freighter, while I was reading that, I didn't realize... You put in your points that the Tales of the Black Raider is supposed to be kind of a parallel to Ozymandias's, to what's going on with him.
Yeah.
I did not realize that when I was reading it. Looking back, I get it. While I was reading it, I just kind of found it distracting, because it's like I'm trying to listen to two conversations at once, because there's the comic going, and then we get, like, real-life conversations, or, in-universe.
And what I like about that is, like, even during that, the real-life conversations, they, like, parallel with the comic book itself, because, like...
End of the world.
Yeah, it's, like, narratively, in general, Watchmen is just, like, I'm not going to say it's flawless, but it's, like, it's so, like, well done, just how information is given, and, like, how the information can contrast with one another. Like, there'll be moments in the book where, like, a character will, like, say one line, and then when it cuts to the next panel, they'll be talking about something different. Or, like, the way one conversation that, like, the newsstand guy has about, like, the end of the world or whatever, like, people...
You cut out there for a moment. Could you repeat? You were newsstand guy?
The newsstand guy, and, like, how a conversation that he's having with, like, a passerby, like, compares to, like, what the one guy is reading in the comic. And I think that
Right,
in general, that just shows like how good Watchmen is at telling a story.
everything
really.
lines up, everything parallels.
And that also gets back into the whole the theme of time, but yeah.
Yeah. The theme of time is an interesting one. I will probably have to reread this at some point. I probably, because I just read this once, and I texted you, because it is kind of a slow read. Like, my Jessica Jones probably has more pages than that, and I read that in like a day, but it took me like several days, like, to read Watchmen. And that was with me sitting down for like hours at a time. Okay, so we were talking about... I'm trying to...
I think we were just talking about the panels, but then we just went right to like the next point of the characters and how those work.
I remember I write here, the main cast were all good people in their own right. They were fighting for a future they could be happy in. They never hurt anyone without an understandable reason. It allowed me to connect with them even if I didn't agree with what they're doing. I will emphasize here, the main cast, I was not including the comedian in there, mainly because he's dead from page 1.
But I think the comedian does definitely count as the main cast, because even despite the fact that he's dead, the whole novel revolves around him and the type of person he was and how he relates to the world. Because like he was also a character that was like there since the Minutemen.
Yeah, his
in
death
the novel.
Is what
so
kicks
like
everything
his
off.
influence is seen throughout the whole world in the world of the novel.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, the comedian definitely, he's the second morally correct Watchman, but the comedian in general is like, he's just a...
When you say morally correct, do you mean they're in the right, or do they mean...
I'm being ironic. I was ironic with Rorschach as well.
Okay. But, admittedly, I'm high-functioning autism, so it's hard for me to pick up on sarcasm a lot of the times.
Yes, I too read comic books. Anyway, the comedian is just like this well-designed, like, he's just like... I'm trying to think of... I think he was described as, like, an absurdist nihilist, because the way that the main cast is designed is, like, each one of them represents, like, a way to view reality.
A different philosophy?
Yeah, a different philosophy. Like, Dr. Manhattan's is, like, purely materialistic, and it's, like, nothing really matters, everything just exists, and there's really no point to anything. That's, like, I've heard I think it was described as, like, materialistic nihilism.
Yeah.
If there's actually like something in the extras, like after you read the novel, where they're like Alan Moore's got notes about how the characters are designed. But yeah, so like Dr. Manhattan is like a materialistic nihilist, and the comedian is like an absurdist nihilist. Like he looks at the world, sees that there's no meaning, and thinks that as a result, thinks that everything is just like a joke. It's just like a little sandbox, and he can do whatever he wants in it. And being a superhero gives him that power to do all these things.
Yeah, nothing matters. I will do whatever I want because nothing matters. I don't know. I am a bit of a nihilist. I'm also like a full-on atheist, so it's like, you know, when we die, we die. We just, it's like going into a long sleep. So, I don't know, my own personal philosophy is like, nothing matters, but we should probably forget that, and, you know, basically, my entire morality is based off of human suffering and also just suffering in general. It's like the morally correct path is the path that leads to the least amount of suffering and to the world where we can all live happily and healthy. So that's the morally correct path. And yes, I am a bit of a nihilist in the sense of that I do believe nothing matters. There's no grand plan or anything. If anybody listens to Hozier, I think my philosophy can probably be summed up in Hozier's song, No Plan. But it's like, there's no plan, but we should probably forget that and just, you know, try and be good people. Otherwise, we're all just going to be miserable. Life is like an amusement park. It has no real reason to exist, but it exists, so we might as well enjoy it while it's there. You don't want to be that one person who sits in the car.
And I somewhat agree with that philosophy. But the thing about the comedian is, like... And what I love about it is, like, everything that he ever...
You keep cutting out there.
I'm cutting out, yep. Well, good thing I'm recording this, just so I can re-edit it. But the great thing about the comedian is, like, his... Everything he does eventually comes back to haunt him. Like, he uses being a superhero as a power trip, and, like... He uses it to like harm people and to just do whatever he wants, specifically just so because he gets a kick out of it, because to him it's funny.
Yeah.
And then as the
He's
novel
basically
goes
an
on,
adrenaline junkie.
yeah, and then as the novel goes on, he starts to like suffer the consequences. Like, oh, I did this to that person, and now like this happened, and I can't do this because of that. And like to him, nothing matters, but it's also like he doesn't give a shit. Honestly, that's his character. He just doesn't care, and I think that's why I like him as a character. Yeah, and
I don't know, that kind of...
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm having a lot of trouble hearing you here.
Am I cutting off too much?
A little. I got your main gist. You were saying the comedian basically believes that he has no moral obligation to do anything, and he just exists to get a kick out of everything, and basically he's an adrenaline junkie.
Yeah, and like you could like even his name, the comedian, is a lot based on like a lot of like stand-up comics philosophy. Like I don't know if you ever heard of George Carlin. But like the way that
I like George Carlin.
The way he viewed the world.
But George Carlin is actually...
Sorry.
I was saying actually George Carlin is, I believe, like left wing, like liberal. I keep forgetting which wing is which, but I want to say George Carlin is very left wing. Like I believe he's pro-abortion. Because I've listened to a couple of stand-up skits of him, and he's like, gay rights, women's rights,
he's
pro-abortion and stuff like that, which seems left-wing, while the comedian...
he's definitely the comedian seems but I'm talking about, like, his philosophy in general, because, like, George Carlin's philosophy was, like, the world is just happening, and I'm just gonna laugh at what's going on. Like, he makes fun, like, when he was active, of course, he's passed away, but... He would make fun of like the right wing, but he would also make fun of the left wing on a lot of things, and he would make fun of nothing was off the table for him. And I think to a degree the comedian is somewhat similar to that. I'm back.
Oh, there you are. Can you hear me just fine?
Yep.
Okay,
What about me?
It's a little craggly, but I don't think you're cutting out anymore. So we were saying the comedian's whole stick, George Carlin.
Yeah, the way George Carlin viewed the world is like everything is just happening, and we're just gonna like laugh at how absurd it is, which is where the term absurdist nihilist comes from, and it relates to stand-up comedy in particular because that's how a lot of stand-up comedians like view the world is like.
Yeah, like a lot of...
We're just let's look at this from like this perspective, and like that's how like you take this like subject, you look at it from an altered perspective, and then that's how like you get jokes, and that's why he's called the comedian, is because he's based on that philosophy. And what I like about it is it's all summed up with Rorschach's Pagliacci line.
Pagliacci?
Where he's talking about towards the end of issue 2, he says, like, I heard a joke once. Man goes to a therapist. He says that he's depressed. Yeah, and he's like, the clown Pagliacci is in town. You should go see him. And he's like, but doctor, I am Pagliacci.
Yeah. Actually, speaking of...
And that just...
Actually, finish up that point real quick, because I was going to go off on something entirely different.
All right. Yeah, and it goes into the whole like concept of like how comedy and tragedy like play off of one another, and the whole like that classic image of like the tears on a clown, and how like comedy itself comes from depression actually, and the fact that the comedian does that, he gets all his kicks, and then at the end of his life he's like to the point where he goes to like the apartment of one of his supervillains drunk, and like
starts having a breakdown.
He has to rant to him because he's got no one else to rant to because he's driven everybody away because of his actions. And that's what it's one issue in the comic book, and I feel like it sums up the entirety of like, I think one of my favorite characters in comic books is the comedian. And the fact that he's just summed up so well is just like one of the beauties of the graphic novel in general. And even then, even issue 2, that's not even his entire story, because they go further into it later in the book.
Yeah, actually, that moment where he is having the mental breakdown, that was kind of the only time I really felt compelled with his character, because it was actually like sort of a break in the monotony, I guess it was. I think that was the thing, that main reason I didn't like him. It was because every time he was on screen, I kind of knew what to expect, but when that showed up, it's like, oh, that's actually something different, that's a little bit more intriguing. You were talking about Rorschach's line. I was actually going to say, like the very opening thing where he's like, oh, all the horrors and stuff will look up and they'll shout, save us, and I'll whisper back, no. Actually, I've got it right here. The accumulated filth of all their sex and murder will
You don't have to say it.
Okay.
I did it earlier in the podcast when you were talking to, like, the maintenance guy or whatever. But, the whole, like...
I think
and
I
all
might...
the wholesome politicians will look up and shout, save us, and I'll whisper no. Yeah, that's also, like...
Yeah, I didn't know that was where that came from. This came from, actually. Like, I've heard that line whisper, like, not line, but in a lot of YouTube comment sections of, like, things around the, just around the internet, and I never knew where that was from. It's like, oh, it's from here. Do we actually think anything of that line? Because I was thinking, like, out of all the lines...
I think that's... Sorry, go ahead.
Out of all the lines in this comic that... Because one of my favorite lines is where, Dr. Manhattan is talking to his ex, and he's like, oh, it's so miraculous out of all the possible combinations and of all the possible things that could have happened, the fact that from all that chaos, such a specific form would be distilled is, a miracle. Like, that actually, that was a line that I really liked, and actually there's a video of that clip. There's a clip from the movie, that line from the movie, and the title of it is, like, the most romantic thing I've ever heard in a movie, and I was like, yeah, I actually do like that line, because even with, like, the nihilism, and even with it, it's like, there is a lot of truth to that line, but I've, like, never heard that before,
yeah,
but I hear this line all the time, and it's like, out of all the things in this comic to be repeated and thrown around, this seems like one of the least interesting things we could repeat.
I actually think that it's the most interesting, because it's like the first line in the comic book, and it just sums up the character of Rorschach so well. It's like, without even knowing, like, the dude's name, but without knowing like what he looks like, his entire, like, view of the world and the world that he lives in.
Yeah, it's a good...
It's all engulfed in just these 3 panels and this single monologue.
Yeah, no, it's a good...
And that's, like, the main monologue that I go back to every time I, like, want to do a Rorschach voice, because it just describes the character so well.
Yeah, it's a good...
And I think that's why it's memorable.
Yeah, I think you're right. It does do a good job of, like, setting up this character before we even see his face. Well, sort of. He's kind of there, but we don't know it's him. I mean, it does do a good job of that, but I just mean, like, in general, because with that line out of context, it just kind of sounds like a really depressing, pessimistic... It sounds like something like a teenage edgelord would say, and I mean...
Well, yeah, and that's also the point of it.
Yeah, that also... I mean, I know we are still, like... We are kind of teenage edgelords ourselves. I mean, we're not teenagers anymore, but,
I'm the bigger edgelord, though.
Yeah, probably. I like to have... I don't know, I've kind of... I've got several projects that I want to work on, but, like, the most recent idea I got was, like, for sort of, like, a black comedy of, like...
Yeah, but, yeah, that's one of the reasons why I like Rorschach, is, like, the fact that it sums up everything all in those 3 panels. My second favorite Rorschach line definitely is, the none of you seem to understand. I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me.
Yeah, that was cool.
Like, there are just so many, like, memorable lines within Watchmen, and I think, like, that's one of my favorite things about the novel in particular, is just, like, how well written it is, because I'm a broken record here. My commentary is a flat circle, but Watchmen is a really well written novel. It's like, and the way it just, like, that Rorschach line just sums up the character, and, like, the whole thing with the comedian, like, that Pagliacci line does sum up the comedian's character as well, because that's, like, I remember first watching the movie, and I thought that the comedian's whole point was like something entirely different. And I think this might still apply, but I thought that his whole character was like he was supposed to be a parody of like how America acted during the Cold War, with like going into the Vietnam War and like trying to like
Actually,
uh
bringing that up now, the
yeah.
comedian kind of reminds me of Donald Trump, which is a scary thought.
No, Donald Trump is not man enough to kill people. But
I don't know. He pulled troops out of
but
Syria.
the comedian
That's
himself,
kind of indirectly killing people.
Yeah, but so did Obama. Anyway, let's get off politics. Let's talk about politics and Watchmen.
Yeah.
Because Watchmen is also a very political novel. Because like the way I always thought that the comedian was like a sum up of like the U.S.'s actions during the Cold War and like how the rest of the world saw the United States during the Cold War. Because like you have that one scene where like he shoots the one woman who he impregnated in Vietnam after the war, and that like sort of just shows like he's not okay with accountability. He doesn't want to be like held accountable for his actions, and then later in the novel he is held accountable for his actions. It's like the comedian is like symbolic of like the way, like if Dr. Manhattan is symbolic of the power that the United States had during the Reagan administration, the comedian is representative of what the United States does with power. And that's what I think makes that whole duo work in general. And the comedian's own symbolism throughout the novel. You still there?
Okay, and I'm back. Here I am. Okay, so you basically said the comedian was a representation of America in the Cold War, and then you cut out.
Okay, so I was saying that he's a representation of what America was in the Cold War and how, like, he doesn't want to be held accountable for his actions. And I was talking about also how Dr. Manhattan is representative of the power that the United States actually had during the Reagan administration. Because when Watchmen was, we were towards the end of the Cold War when Watchmen was written. And I think that is reflected throughout the novel. Because, like,
arguably,
Russia...
no, you finish.
Sorry, go ahead.
You finish.
All right. Well, because Russia in the novel is like sort of impotent, and they're sort of like on their last legs, and that's kind of where they were in the novel, like in real life. Actually, like the Cold War officially ended in like what 1990.
I don't know.
In like the Berlin Wall.
You could technically, what I was going to say earlier is technically you could argue that to some extent the Cold War is still going on. Like, there still is a lot of tension between us and Russia. I'm no expert on
There's never going to stop being tension between the United States and Russia, just like there's never going to stop being tension between the United States and, like, literally any country on the earth. But the great thing about Watchmen and, like, the way it represents the Cold War is, like, Dr. Manhattan is, like, this ultimate, like, power that could end... This is a man that could end worlds, and... Like, there's a whole section of, like, towards the end of chapter 4, I believe, where, like, Dr. Manhattan's, like, friend is talking about that, and, like, how, like, his whole line about, like, I never said Superman exists and he's American, I said God exists and he's American, and if you're terrified by that concept, it only means you're sane. And the way that, like, Dr. Manhattan is just, like, presented in that fashion, because that's what he was supposed to represent. Like, there's another... I mentioned it earlier, but The Dark Knight Returns is where that one line came from, where the world only makes sense if you force it to. But Superman in that novel is used in the same way Dr. Manhattan is, as representative of, like, the United States' power over the globe and how they can, like, do no wrong or whatever, and what happens when that power is taken away and, like, where the United States stands. It's supposed to be representative of the arms race and the fact that we were... and I think technically to a degree still are dominating in terms of like military strength and like
I don't know.
our own sort of dominance over the world. And I think that that's what makes that whole duo of Dr. Manhattan and the comedian work.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Again, I'm not as well versed in politics as I'd like to be, but I am kind of nervous with all the other countries. Like, isn't North Korea still making nuclear weapons?
I think they. I don't even know. I think they might be.
I think they
Even if
are,
they
because
even if they make nuclear weapons, I wouldn't be concerned about North Korea because, like, even if they were to launch like one nuke, we got like 1,000 other nukes with their name on it. But
yeah, but I don't want to start. I don't want
that's
any
like,
nukes going off. I do not want to. Actually, I think the
and
main
that's
reason.
like what the thing, and that's also a plot of Watchmen is like
Yeah.
mutual, like nuclear arms and like how that functions. Actually, Dr. Manhattan's nihilism is actually somewhat based off of the dude who invented the atomic bomb. His name slips from my mind, but he just had like an epic rap battle written about him. He's the guy that said like you look up this guy. I'm gonna look him up real quick.
Okay.
Because like his whole thing was like he had that line of after he invented the atomic bomb, he like realized that he invented a machine that could like destroy the world as we know it, and he had that line of like now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. And you can see in that interview, you look into his eyes and like he's just looking down at the floor, and he's not really like showing emotion because he's so like destroyed emotionally by like what he's done with his work.
Yeah.
And I think that that's also a lot of what like Dr. Manhattan's whole concept comes to. And like all of these characters again were supposed to represent like specific parts of like American culture or just like the worldviews in general.
Yeah.
And that was like I went completely off topic, but I was originally talking about how the comedian. Yeah, I was originally talking about how the comedian was representative of like the United States' actions, and that's how I originally thought he was supposed to be. And I think that still is true to an extent, but Rorschach's whole line about Pagliacci, that just sums up his character from a narrative perspective in general.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about
actually our discussion about the atomic bomb, I'm kind of vaguely reminded of when we were discussing World War II in high school. They actually said tragic irony, Zyklon B, which is the gas that they used to kill the Jews to actually just kill people in general in those in the Nazi gas tanks, was actually, if I remember correctly, was created by a Jewish person to exterminate rats. And the difference between Zyklon A and Zyklon B is Zyklon A, the original gas that the person invented, was invented to be to get rid of pests and rats like cockroaches and rats and just things that spread disease. And the difference is Zyklon A had a very distinct odor to it so that you could smell it and get out and not breathe in the toxic gas. But Zyklon B, which the Nazis used, didn't have that odor, so you would just suffocate and you wouldn't realize it until really it was too late. Which, I mean, didn't really particularly matter because they were quite literally locked in. So the dark part of the insensitive dark sociopath part of me is like wondering why they even bothered to get rid of the smell if they didn't even have an option to get out. But yeah, our discussion with the atomic bomb is kind of reminding me of that, of like how somebody's work, which was originally made for something good, was turned into something horrifically evil.
Yeah. And the whole Minutemen thing does actually get into like the politics of the time and how actually like how they have a line in a biography about how originally Hooded Justice was like pro-Hitler up until World War II, like the United States got involved in it.
Yeah.
And it's just the way ending of like American culture throughout the 1900s and how these superheroes in the novel are representative of those viewpoints. That just like brings the whole novel together.
Right. I think we've only got 2 more points left in like the things we liked, and that is the ending leaves me thinking and the Watchmen function in a very believable way. I think we've kind of maybe not talked to death, but we've talked a lot about the characters, so let's get while we've got that in our minds. I've got the Watchmen function in a very believable way. And now that you actually mentioned that all of them represent different philosophies, what do we think that says about like how each character sort of interacts with each other?
It's the debating of like ways to view the world in particular, I think, and it's like how like different things like contrast with each other. Like the whole team up of like Night Owl and Rorschach. If the whole like philosophy thing is to be believed, Night Owl represents somebody who just doesn't care about what's happening in the world, and they'd rather focus on other things. Like they're not political. And you could see Rorschach as like the dude that's like constantly trying to force morality onto Night Owl, and Night Owl just like that he doesn't really care, but he still like likes Rorschach as a person.
Yeah, I
and like yeah,
kind of got a bit of a different vibe. I thought Night Owl was kind of like the person groping in the dark for I want to make the world better, but I don't know how. Like, you know,
well,
basically
actually,
I thought he kind
I'd argue, yeah, like
I thought he kind of
I think he does. Sorry, go ahead.
I think he kind of represented more so confusion, because he doesn't, for a lot of the novel, he doesn't really do anything until the very end, where he decides, like, Rorschach's black and white mentality. He doesn't fully agree with Rorschach, but he does believe, you know, like, I think if Night Owl represented anything, he probably represented just the average person reading this. Because their team up is also probably my favorite part, because I love the way they interact.
And that's something that, like, and that gets back to the whole thing about, like, he doesn't really care. Because he himself is sort of, like, a comic book fan that became a superhero. Because he talks about how, like, he was inspired by the original Night Owl to become a superhero. And he specifically wanted to take the moniker of Night Owl because he respected the original Night Owl so much. And he didn't want to become a superhero to really help people. He kind of just wanted to become a superhero for the thrill of it. And to a degree, he does want to help people because that's how he believes superheroes should act.
Yeah, that's
But he also and the reason why he does nothing throughout it is because like it's illegal for him, and he's like, all right, you know what, if I can't my cute little outfit and go out and beat up people anymore, I'll just lay around, be retired, and like talk about it. And like he misses it, but he doesn't want to like act like he misses it. It's sort of like
he's basically having a midlife crisis.
Yeah, it is a midlife crisis, really, and he wants to move past it, but deep down he still wants to be like a crime fighter.
Yeah.
And I think the thing is, the reason why Rorschach and him like compare and contrast so well is that they both have that sense of morality of like there is right and there is wrong and evil must be punished.
Yeah.
But whereas Rorschach keeps that philosophy throughout the whole novel and throughout his whole life, Night Owl sort of gives it up the moment that he gets any sort of pushback from the government or whatever. He's like, all right, well, they don't want me doing this. That's fine. I can just... He's not, like, into it. He really doesn't that much. And when I'm talking about, like, Rorschach attempting to, like, force his morality onto him, that's how I think that these two are portrayed. It's like these two different philosophies. They compare with each other, they contrast with each other, and
one's incredibly laid back, and then the other one's like dialed up to 11.
Exactly.
Yeah. Actually, flipping through this comic, I just realized we haven't really talked anything about like the women characters in this, despite the fact that
Oh, that's because Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons themselves have admitted that they didn't really care about Silk Spectre. Like, she's one of the few characters that like did not have a philosophy intrinsically like designed towards her. I think her philosophy would be sort of like an emotional philosophy of like, we need to do good because like
she was less a philosophy,
it's good to do good things, and she's less of a philosophy and more of just like
emotion.
I think basically she was just there because they needed to have a woman on the team. Like, I don't think
that kind of does disappoint me. Like, I do believe, I don't think it's, like, anti-feminist. I do believe overall it is kind of more so feminist than anti-feminist.
Yeah, it's definitely,
But I do not like how, I mean, I do wish there was a more balance with the genders. Like, I've actually got, in the things we don't like, I do have 2 points being, like, there's not a lot of diversity in this cast. Like, pretty much the entire cast's white, and, like, we've only got, like, 2 women who like make any impact, and that's Silk Spectre. And is her daughter also called Silk Spectre? Oops.
Oh, I was talking about the second Silk Spectre, Laurie.
Yeah, Laurie.
Where I was, but yeah, then you have Sally, which is like the first Silk Spectre.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like she kind of, unlike a lot of the other superheroes who like deliberately get into the career of being a superhero, she's sort of like bred into it.
Yeah, that's actually kind of something
And that's another, yeah.
Actually, I kind of did like Laurie in that sense. Like, I think if Laurie represented something, she would probably be representative of how, like, a lot of women feel like they are forced to do specific things. It's like, oh, you're a woman, you know, you can't just do this. You have to be progressive. You have to, like, you know, empower your, you know, you have to do something for women empowerment. Like, I actually remember a movie, I hope it's still on Netflix, but it's called Mona Lisa Smile. And it's basically about all these women, all these girls taking an art class, and the teacher, you know, is trying to get them to think more for themselves. But one of her students drops out of school to be a housewife, and the teacher is like, oh no, you know, you can go to college. Look, you got accepted to Yale. You can have your cake and eat it too. You can be a housewife. And then the housewife calls her out and says, no, you know, you listen to me. I want to be a housewife. You see a housewife as being, you know, what's the word she uses? You see a housewife as a woman of lower intelligence and of lower status, but this is what I want. I want to stay at home and raise a family, and, you know, part of feminism is basically, essentially, feminism is men and women are equal, and we should be able to do whatever we want so long as we're not hurting anyone and we have the skill to do so. Which, you know, part of that means, like, yes, if you're a woman and you want to run your own business, you can do that. But the other side of that is, if you're a woman and you want to stay at home and take care of the kids, you should be able to do that. If that's what makes you happy, you know, you should be able to do that. And a lot of women are kind of put down for wanting to be, you know, for wanting that sort of traditional lifestyle, even though there's nothing really wrong with that lifestyle. Actually, men are also, like, there's a video I haven't watched, but it's, like, about, I can't even remember the title, but, you know, anytime, like, a man admits to being a homemaker, it's like they're instantly inferior, as if, you know, as if rearing children is somehow degrades you. But that's, like, if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do, and you should be able to do it. And so Laurie kind of feels like those people who are just like, you know, no, you have to be this because the world needs more empowering women, and it's like, but I don't want to do that. I want to do this, which is kind of, in a way, a little bit anti-feminist, because, as I said, you know, feminism means we should all be able to do what we want regardless of our sex and our gender. And the fact that she feels kind of, and then she kind of represents, like, all those women who go to, like, law school, and, like, all those women who, you know, become boss women, even though that's not what they want, but they feel obligated to do this because of because of, like, the feminist movement. Do we have any comments on that?
Honestly, what you're talking about there, I do somewhat agree with that, but I think the thing is that, like, her whole thing is she wants to move away from being that. But at the same time, she really wants to be a superhero. She just doesn't like the baggage of, like, having to represent Silk Spectre, or having to represent, like, something larger. Like, deep down, she wants to be an action hero and help people just like her mother. It's just the fact that she was forced into it. That's the reason why she grew disgusted with it.
Yeah, she wants to do it, but she wants to do it her way.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's also, like, in a way, that is sort of a bit of an anti-feminist message, but at the same time, like, Alan Moore in general, he's pretty left-wing, so I don't think he really intended it to be that way. I think just really...
No, I mean the philosophy that women have to do certain things, even if it is something empowering, like, you know, is
Yeah, and I mean, that also contrasts... Well, that's also one of the reasons why Night Owl and Silk Spectre work together as well, because, like, they're both characters that got their monikers from people before them, and the difference is that, like, while she was forced to be Silk Spectre, Night Owl wanted to be Night Owl. Like, he chose the moniker, but Silk Spectre was sort of just handed the title.
Yeah.
And the reason why they contrast so much, and well, not contrast, but the reason why they work together so well is because in that one issue, when they're together, they decide to help people because they want to help people, and not because anybody else is telling them to. So they're sort of just, like, breaking away from whatever standards they were given.
Yeah. So I kind of do like I kind of do like Laurie I don't like Sally. I feel like she got the short end of the stick here.
Yeah, but Sally is also like one of those characters. She was also just supposed to be representative of like, you go back to that whole like feminist ideology thing, and it's like the way that actresses in like those days were more so portrayed as like objects. And actually that actually brings it back to like the whole, like, even today we have like the Me Too movement and stuff, and all like the sexual assaults or whatever that goes on in Hollywood and pretty much everywhere in general, really. And I think that
I don't remember if I told you about this, but actually while I was working at the gas station, we had to ban someone for sending me obscene letters.
No, you told me about that. Yeah.
Yeah, but okay, but yeah, I don't know. This is it's kind of a sticky situation, mainly because I forget what it's called, but we actually don't have a lot of people. I think probably one of the main problems in just like social justice, if we got a lot of people who think, oh, racism isn't a problem anymore, feminism isn't a problem. It's like,
yeah, those things are never going to stop being problems, no doubt.
Yeah, but I mean, I do believe that we will eventually get to a point where those problems are so minute they're not worth mentioning, but definitely not in our lifetime.
And I don't think we're ever going to get that way, because I feel like humanity in general is just too like selfish and violent and abusive to ever move away from such things. But yeah, I'd rather not get into a thing about social justice at the moment. But yeah, that's one of the things, one of the reasons why I like the characters is just like the way they contrast with one another, each one of them. And we haven't talked about Ozymandias yet, probably because of the whole spoiler thing. But
well, we're in the spoiler section now, mainly because he's not in a lot of the novel. Like he only shows up for a few scenes before he just drops his New York bomb. I know, honestly, it was kind of scary reading Ozymandias' part, because I remember a lot of the lines he says are things that I was thinking when I was younger, and it's like, oh frick, was that me? I know there's a certain type of narcissism where it's like, I forget what it's called, but there's the normal narcissism that we're used to, where it's like people will, do a lot of showboating and like talk and tell everybody they're the greatest thing. But there's a second type of narcissism which is more quiet, and it's basically like that person who will sit in the corner smugly thinking, oh, I'm better than all of you. And it's like, this kind of feels more like Ozymandias' narcissism. And it's a little scary because I was reading that, I was like, that kind of reminds me of when I was younger. It's like, I don't know, I must have been I keep thinking, every time I think back to my younger self, I was like, my younger self was kind of a bratty asshole.
Yeah.
I don't know, might be a little self-centered of me to talk about myself during a podcast about comics, but that was just what I was thinking when I was
honestly, because that's also a thing about Ozymandias, is like his whole philosophy, like, you can agree with it to an extent. Like, he is very egotistical, and I think like he doesn't really realize that about himself. Like, going back to Tales of the Black Freighter and how that symbolizes his journey. Tales of the Black Freighter, the whole story is this pirate that tries to get back to his old town to save his his wife and his children from like this evil threat, and he believes that like he's like the only person that can do it. And it gets to the point where he starts like, even when he comes into contact with actual people, he doesn't trust them, and he immediately thinks that they're part of the enemy. Yeah,
he's just completely
paranoid.
Yeah,
and the way that symbolizes like Ozymandias is because like his whole idea originally stemmed from the comedian burning that map of like how to save the world or whatever, saying like nothing is going to matter if the nukes start dropping.
Right.
And in the movie, there's this great line, because I don't think it's in the comics. In the movie, Ozymandias is the one that comes up with the plan, not Captain Metropolis. And the comedian has this great line about like, you think you're the smartest man in the world, but like you're not. Like, none of us are good enough to like figure out how to do that. Like, no one man can solve that, because like you can go after Moloch and you can stop these gang wars, but nothing's going to happen when the world's drop, and then you're going to be the smartest man on the cinder.
Right.
And it's that line, like, smartest man on the cinder. And
I think a version of that line is in the comic, because that sounds very familiar.
I think it is, yeah, but I remember it specifically from the movie,
Right.
just because he's talking directly to Ozymandias, who comes up with the plan. And the way like that whole idea works is he's like, all right, I'm gonna figure out how to save the world, and he gets so caught up in figuring out like, how do I stop the world from trying to nuke each other, that he ends up turning away like the people that he was originally supposed to care about in the process. Like,
Yeah.
at the end of the at the end he like drops that squid in New York. Yeah, he kills his assistants, he drops that squid in New York, and it's like he's an egotistical madman, but at the same time his philosophy makes sense. Like it's all good intentions, but ultimately it just results in the death of millions of people.
Yeah.
And even if it does create a utopia, is it a utopia that was worth it? Do the ends justify the means?
I am very much a person of the ends do justify the means, but I'm gonna say now, if he was that smart, and if he had that much money and that much technology, he probably could have just created, like, some sort of radio signal that canceled all the nukes. Like, just some sort of...
Well, yeah, but even if you cancel all the nukes, even if you can destroy every single nuke on the planet, humanity is still going to find a way to screw itself over. It's still going to find ways to harm each other and kill each other. So
actually,
the plan...
I'm reminded of a line from Good Omens, which is, I mentioned this to you a couple months ago, but basically it's about an angel and a demon trying to stop the what's it called, the Rapture, or not the Rapture, but basically the Rapture, the end of the world.
I think it's the Rapture, like the end times.
Yeah, they're trying to stop that, and at one point, the Antichrist, who's really just a normal boy but with a lot of superpowers, who at one point he says, they say, oh, you've got all this power, why don't you why don't you bring back all the dead whales, and why don't you fix climate change? And Adam, that's the Antichrist's name, he says, if I bring back all the whales, will that teach people not to kill them anymore? And they're like, oh no, if you bring back all the whales, we're just gonna kill them again, and we need to actually take responsibility for what we've done, not just undo it.
And that's like the great thing about like Ozymandias' plan is like to unite the world against an unseen threat. So it's almost like directing the Cold War from being between two nations to being between two like planets, essentially, or like two entities. Like in the movie, the squid isn't there. It's replaced with like Dr. Manhattan, which makes sense more sense in the movie than it does in the novel. But yeah, it's like concept is like we're going to unite humanity against this common threat.
Yeah, it's kind of it's kind of funny. He basically uses he basically manipulates people's fear of the unknown to unite the world when actually the superheroes themselves are kind of unknown. And also a lot of the other, like, the minorities, like, as much as there's not a lot of diversity in the main cast, we do see people of color and we do see LGBT characters throughout there, and they actually kind of are another oppressed other.
Yeah.
I think...
But that's another thing, the whole, like, fear of the unknown concept, because that was the main thing about the Cold War, is, like, well, like, we don't know if they're gonna nuke us or whatever. We don't know when the world's gonna end, and we're afraid of that. Like, there's this really great band from 75, 76, I want to say. They're called this. They have this song called they're called the Sex Pistols.
The Sex Pistols.
There's this song called "Holiday in the Sun." They're the first, like, one of the first punk rock bands, and in that song, there's a line where he says, like, the whole thing is like, I don't want a holiday in the sun. I want to like see the history of like Eastern Russia or whatever, and it talks about like the Cold War and like how both these cultures are divided. And one of his lines in the song is, "I'm looking over the wall and they're looking at me."
Right. Actually,
and that's sort of supposed to be reflective of the whole, if you gaze into the abyss gazes back into you.
Right.
And it's that.
Yeah. I'm again reminded, while we're talking about musicians, I'm actually again reminded of Hozier. He wrote Take Me to Church a couple years ago. I cannot praise him enough. And actually, what we're talking about right now, he wrote his newest album, which was released March of, now it's last year, Wasteland Baby, was essentially, a lot of it was about, like, basically it's a complete album of just songs for the end of the world. And the song I'm reminded of specifically is called Bee. Actually, let me look up the lyrics real quick. Oh, that's the wrong. And one of it is when the. Hold on, let me find the stupid line. If I can find it, oh, here it is. A lot of his music actually deals with like the church and how religion affects the world. Mostly in a very criticizing way. If you've listened to Take Me to Church and seen the video for that, I mean, the entire video for Take Me to Church is basically about gay oppression. But it's the line I'm thinking of. Here it is. Be the hopeful feeling when Eden was lost. That's been deaf to our laughter since the master was crossed. Which side of the wall really suffers that cost? And then the next line that I'm talking about is, when the man who gives the order is born next time around on the boat sent back, which is basically a direct reference to immigration, and like the fear of the unknown in that sense is like, the fear of the unknown might send away, because basically what he's implying is that the second coming of Jesus is going to be born in like the Middle East, or is Jerusalem in the Middle East?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Why am I getting an ad for that? Hold on.
You getting an ad for the Middle East?
No, I'm getting an ad for some kind of music, but I exited. Like basically, he's saying there that our fear of the unknown is going. Jesus is going to be born in the Middle East, and he's going to try and come to our world, and we're going to push him away because he's part of what we consider the unknown. Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
So, yeah. Again, he's a really good artist. You should. Anyone who's listening who hasn't, who doesn't know who I'm talking about, go look him up. He's very interesting. And he actually, while we're talking about political stuff, he does a podcast with Global Citizen, which is basically where they talk about world issues and what you as an everyday person can do to sort of like ease the burden of like a bunch of all these world problems. And Global Citizen is basically this charity program which goes out and works with different people to like sort of ease poverty. Actually, I believe they say that we actually do have the ability to end extreme poverty by 2030, which is amazing news. However, we are severely behind our deadlines to actually meet that. But we are slowly but surely addressing problems. We just need to address them more diligently and more quickly if we're actually going to do anything freaking about it. So, got a little off topic, but, that's a good plug-in.
But, yeah, on the subject of singers or whatever and songwriters, let's talk about Bob Dylan real quick, because his influence is actually seen throughout Watchmen.
Bob Dylan. I feel like I should recognize that name, but I don't.
He wrote All Along the Watchtower, Desolation Row, what else did he write? What's that one song? A Ballad of a Thin Man. He's written a lot of songs. Actually, in the movie,
you said it was Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan, yeah. Actually, one of my favorite parts of the movie is the opening scene that introduces the Minutemen and the whole concept of the Watchmen and how they affected history. The song that plays during that is the times they are a-changin'.
Right.
And the thing about Bob Dylan is he was like a folk singer whose whole thing was like during the 60s, he was like the big like voice of a generation. He was the voice of the maybe not the hippies, but like the voice of like the
Flower Children.
Time and like what?
The Flower Children. They were like the
the Flower Children. Well, I don't know if he's technically hippie, but like he was the voice of like people that like people like Alan Moore, people like Dave Gibbons, who that like the way America was handling the Cold War, and they're like, we just need peace, we just need like this, and we just need that. And the thing about Bob Dylan is like that's the reason why the novel is so like it's written the way it is in terms of like tone and like theme.
Yeah.
The term I think it was Dave Gibbons or whatever wrote like a little preamble at the beginning of this comic book that I have before it starts, where it's like it's Dave Gibbons. He says like the one line that really inspired the novel comes from the Bob Dylan song Desolation Row, where he says, at midnight, all the agents and superhuman crew go out and round up everyone that know more than they do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see that. I actually do.
And that's, yeah.
Yeah, I actually.
And then that's where.
Yeah, I'm
Sorry,
looking. No, I was just saying I'm looking at the section what you're talking about right here. I didn't notice that. I thought that was just credits. It began with Bob Dylan. For me, a couplet from his 1966 masterpiece "Desolation Row" was the spark that would one day ignite Watchmen. And the quote is, "At midnight, all the agents and the superhuman crew come out and round up everyone who knows more than they do."
Yeah, I said that. And that's not the first time that he's quoted. That's the first time that he's quoted, but that's not the only time that he's quoted at one of the ends of the issues. Is the second time is, I think, like chapter, maybe not 9, I think it's chapter 10, when they have like All Along the Watchtower. It was a quote from All Along the Watchtower, which is, the song itself is actually in the movie, and that scene that I was talking about in the comic book where like they have the smiley face on Mars, the music that plays when that's panning up is All Along the Watchtower. It's the cover by Jimi Hendrix, and that's like one of my favorite songs, I think.
All right.
But yeah, that's the thing about it, is a lot inspired by like Bob Dylan and like a lot of like 60s stuff.
Right.
And then and how that contrasts with like a lot of different themes in there, and I think like you can't really talk about Watchmen without at least mentioning Bob Dylan. I don't think.
Yeah, I've actually I'll have to look him up and listen to some of his music when we're done with this. But yeah. For now, I think the last point we've got on things we liked was the ending leaves me thinking, and I just kind of like that it does make me question, like, well, was that really? I do too. Like, one of the things I appreciate really in things that I just consume is when something actually gets me to think. Because a lot of the times, and this isn't like a discredit to stuff that just, like Tom and Jerry just exists for the sake of being funny, and that doesn't make it any less of an art for, just being something funny. I mean, we all need a little break from reality every now and again. But, it's very rare. Like, actually, that's kind of why my favorite movie from the MCU is Thor: The Dark World, which I know is an incredibly unpopular opinion, and maybe one day I might actually. I keep saying I'll write a review for that movie, but I keep deleting what I've written because I don't like it the next week I read it. But yeah, I think we'll talk. I've got the ending mentioned again in things we didn't like, so I think we'll just move on to that. Because as much as I do like how it leaves me thinking, like it does leave me questioning.
Well, yeah, we've been talking about how it leaves us thinking throughout this entire thing, honestly.
Yeah, like I think,
and like the ending in particular is just like.
Yeah, I think
the fact that it doesn't have that happy ending, I think, just shows like the whole like the theme of nihilism, first of all, but at the same time the whole political debate behind it, and the fact that because superhero stories are set in morality, like the Joker is always the bad guy except in the most recent movie, and Batman is always the good guy.
I don't know, again,
and it's like
again, I've been reading like from a lot of the Thor comics, and even though there is a very like Malekith has been the most recent, I haven't started on War of the Realms. I want to do that for this podcast eventually, but I'm trying to wait till they, release like a collection of all the War of Realms novels, because that's one of those things where they tell it across multiple, like one of the issues in Squirrel Girl and another's in Spider-Man, and a lot of them are in Thor. But the thing I was talking about is Thor has been doing like the Unworthy Thor storyline ever since. They've gotten a little bit more morally gray, and even though
well, the thing about the whole morally gray thing in the comic books is that Watchmen,
kicked that
when
off.
It was released, was unique. It was unique because of that. Yeah, it sort of. I don't want to say it was the first to do it.
It was the first
but
to do
it was
it and
definitely
get
one of
as
the,
much attention as it did.
Yeah, it was one of the most popular examples of it, and a lot of comic book historians and a lot of like people who look at that kind of stuff would say that Watchmen is like when superhero comic books, quote unquote, grew up. It talks about like politics, and it talks about like, and there's no set morality. And I think the thing about Alan Moore is like he doesn't actually like the character of Rorschach, and I think I mentioned it before, how he actually didn't intend Rorschach to be a likable character.
Oh.
Because his whole thing was Rorschach was actually meant to be a parody of the concept of being a superhero itself, and specifically the pulp heroes, whose influences were a lot like more. The pulp heroes were a lot more like dark and violent, and actually their influences is to in their stories. There's a lot more of like sexual undertones, which is why like Rorschach is a huge misogynist, and he's like.
Wait, is he a huge misogynist? I didn't pick that up.
Oh yeah, he's a huge misogynist. He constantly refers to women as like
Oh yeah, I thought that was just
like he calls Sally Jupiter a whore at one point in the novel, and
I must have missed that. I don't know.
Trust me, that is everywhere in the book, especially like because he constantly talks about like the mask keeps him free from like fear or lust, and he talks about like he's supposed to be this like far right like parody of like superhero morality and how like right and wrong, and like if you look at the world as it is, there's no such thing as right and wrong. Everything is morally gray, but Rorschach wants to force it into being right and wrong.
Right. I don't know. I guess
he was yeah.
I guess I just interpreted the misogyny as just another, because I know he does keep referring to like a lot of the women as whores, but I don't. Did he ever? I didn't like. Was he ever disrespectful to Lori?
Oh hell yeah, he was disrespectful to her, and like the first novel, she talks about how like, oh, I don't like the comedian, you know, like did you know that she like raped my mother or whatever? Like how can you support somebody like that? And then he's like, I'm not here to judge the moral lapses of decent men. And she's like, you call a rape a moral lapse? And it's like, yeah, he's a misogynist. Because and a lot of that is inspired by his background of being raised by like an abusive prostitute.
Yeah.
That's where that's where his misogyny comes from.
Yeah, more comes just from him associating just his hatred
and
of
the
his
fact
mother
that,
being transferred to all women in general.
Yeah, and there's the subtlety of the fact that the mask that he like wears is actually like cut and rebranded from like a dress that was thrown away, because he's like, all right, well, this woman threw this dress away, so I'm just gonna make it into my own thing because I like the design.
Yeah.
So the irony of his misogyny is that, and his like whole like thing about you got to be a man and like not liking women is like he's constantly wearing a woman's garment on his face at all times, and that's like, you know, it's like sexual subtlety to Rorschach. And that also gets into how like Alan Moore designed these characters, and that's one of the reasons why he's also one of my favorite characters in comic book history.
Okay, well, I guess
like a lot of people say like, oh, you're not supposed to like Rorschach, but like I like Rorschach because you're not supposed to like him.
Yeah, I guess that's my own misogyny in my. There's a lot of like. I've kind of been realizing as I've grown up that a lot of things were just kind of ingrained into me, and I didn't realize until I actually was forced to look at them that, oh, that's, like, I remember when I was younger, I would say, like, post things that I didn't realize were homophobic and transphobic on comments, on YouTube comments, and I really regret that now. And actually, I remember you specifically, you kept making that I identify as a helicopter joke.
Oh, yeah.
Which is very transphobic.
Yeah.
So when
go ahead and cancel me. I don't care.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, you're not like that anymore. I mean,
yeah, I'm not. Yeah. Well,
yeah. I mean, heck, we're still friends, and I'm transgender.
Oh right, yeah.
Yeah, non-binary is a subgroup of transgender. That's what the in the transgender flag, it's blue, pink, and white. I know. Yeah,
Yeah,
the white's for non-binary.
The culture, yeah.
Yeah, but
yeah. So
I guess
basically,
that's why I missed the misogyny. It's just my own ingrained. Well, that's a lovely little realization there.
Yeah, that's what I like about like Rorschach is like he's a man of like many flaws, and that's what.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's what I really like about the character.
I don't know. I think the main reason I like him is just because this is something like I didn't like. I've kind of might be a little off topic, but I've kind of stopped watching Doctor Who after the 8th season. I want to get back into it, but I stopped watching it, and the main reason was because the character was it was very much a situation of a lot of the times the characters were written to suit the plot, and like their morality, like whether or not the Doctor was willing to kill could change from episode to episode, which really frustrated me. Like, oh, in one episode, we're willing to kill these innocent spider babies because if they grow up simply by being what they are, they will eat all the humans and destroy the world. But in the season finale, he's upset with his duplicate for killing all the Daleks, which are literal space Nazis, and it's like, well, that's basically the main reason I stopped watching. It was just because the fluctuation of, like, you know, how the characters were constantly written for the plot, and how that just would left to a lot of nonsensicalities, and also how that left to, like, the characters not getting anything done. Like, sometimes the Doctor wouldn't get things done that needed to get things done because the plot required it for basically more emotional manipulation. And so, like, the main reason I kind of like Rorschach here is because he actually did go out and get things done.
Yeah.
So
that's also one of the things, is like, despite the fact that he's such a broken character and he's got all these flaws and he's like uber right wing to a fault, he's the only person that tries to do the right thing at the end, and he gets killed because of it. So even if you disagree with his morality at all,
yeah,
you still respect the fact that he's willing to die for it.
yeah, I just respect the fact that he actually went out and tried to be better.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I don't like how his character is treated in the sequel series that came out on HBO recently, but we'll get to that later.
I haven't watched that. I don't... It came out... I know it says right here, like, I've got on my copy, it says, now an HBO series, and it's like, I haven't heard... I just know... I know that exists. I haven't really heard anything about the quality of it, but we've got that at a later point.
Yeah, we can discuss it later. All right.
Yeah.
Things we didn't like.
Okay.
I wrote literally nothing.
Yeah. I wrote...
This novel is perfect. It has no flaws at all. Even its flaws aren't actually flaws because they were intended to be flaws. This is some 4D chess stuff right here.
Yeah.
You need to have a big boy brain to understand all of this, and it's flawless.
I know. I do have a couple... I think one of my points is why did the comedian get so much page time? He's boring and just an asshole, and I don't remember much of his stuff being relevant to the plot. But I think we already talked about that when we were talking about the characters.
Yeah, we definitely talked about, like, the comedian, but yeah.
Yeah, we'll just skip over that.
I found him to be the most interesting character, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we pretty much already talked about that point, but I remember I specifically say, the only gay couple we met had a physical confrontation, not good for LGBTQ plus representation, because homophobes use that stuff as a way of saying gays are either abusers or abuse victims. That I did not like.
Yeah, and then I had that note, and, like, when I wrote that note, I don't think I think I was still trying to process it myself, but I don't know if I'm pretty sure it's in the novel, but actually there is another, they don't show it as an LGBTQ couple, but they do talk about it. Well, actually there's two of them that I want to discuss in particular. One of them being the Silhouette, who was a
lesbian
Minuteman. Yeah, she was a lesbian. Yeah, she was, and she, I think, maybe not necessarily a positive LGBTQ role model, but it's clear she wasn't intended to be like a negative stereotype. She was more so meant to be like just showing, because that's another thing, going back to the whole, like, Hollywood thing, like, when the novel was written, and especially as they're talking about it as it relates to being in the 40s or whatever.
Yeah, you said this was written in...
being gay at all was, it was written in 85.
Yeah, 85.
But the Silhouette in particular was she operated in the 40s and like the 40s. So the thing about the way that's represented is because at the time it was hugely controversial, and it talks about, like, how a lot of celebrities have their own controversial things.
Yeah.
And one of the other things, the other LGBTQ couple that's in it, in the Minutemen thing, is Hooded Justice and Captain Metropolis. Like, they were gay behind closed doors, and the thing about...
I didn't catch that. Did they ever explicitly say that? Like, I know I was reading
Yep, they explicitly say that. And they actually say that that's the reason why Sally Jupiter had to pretend. She actually had to pretend to be in a relationship with, I believe, Hooded Justice to cover up for that, because if it got out that like these huge superhero celebrities were gay, then like the whole marketing and everything just falls flat on its face.
Yeah,
and that's also why they covered up the fact that the comedian raped Sally Jupiter.
Yeah. Actually, I was.
Well, I know. I'll give you this. It's definitely not like necessarily all that pro LGBTQ.
Well, I was about to say this. It's kind of a little unfair to, what did you say, what was her name? The Silhouette or whatever?
Yes, Silhouette.
Yeah, she never actually, she's in the background, and although they do talk about it in a positive light, like, oh, she was kicked off the team for being a lesbian, and that was wrong, even though we let these other two men be gay, you know, but because that became public, or because that was in danger of being public, we kicked her out for marketing. Like, that definitely is on the side of the LGBT community. But I think it also kind of says a little something that the Silhouette never actually speaks in the novel. She's just a character that's mentioned, and she's mentioned in the documents that you can skip over. Like, you probably shouldn't, but you can.
Yeah, you're not really supposed to skip over them, but I think technically you can. But the thing about the reason for that is I think that, again, gets into the whole like world building thing. And yeah, granted, she's not like, she doesn't really speak technically, but her actions are still like throughout that whole background. And actually in the movie, I don't know, did you see like the opening scene of the movie when like they're going through
anything from the movie? I just saw like a clip of
well, yeah, in the opening thing, there's actually a scene of her like you know that famous World War II picture where it's like you got the one sailor that's like kissing the one woman. Because
no,
you'd know it if you saw it, I think. Because in the movie, that man is actually replaced by the Silhouette, and in the movie, that woman, like, I don't know if she like marries her or whatever, but they are a couple for a long time, and actually it's implied, well, it's explicitly implied that the reason why she was murdered was because she was a lesbian and she was in this relationship, because like yeah,
that goes actually I think it was just this year or just last year in 2019, I think at least 19 people were killed for being transgender, which is depressing.
And you can so granted, like, while Watchmen is not like explicitly like all in all pro LGBTQ or whatever, it was also a novel that was written in 1985. There was a lot of, especially with like the AIDS epidemic and like the misunderstanding about how that worked. There was
that was like, I actually reading an article a couple months ago, and they're like, some people actually just referred to it as gay cancer because they thought it was just God punishing all the homosexuals.
It was referred to, I think it was, I forget what the original term was, but it was like the original term for AIDS specifically had like gay disease in it. I forget what.
I think it was just gay cancer.
GRID. I think it was GRID. I think that's what they called it. Because it was like a gay-related immunodisease or something like that.
Yeah, and for a while nobody did anything about it, and they let it get absolutely out of control.
Yeah, and again, like, Watchmen is a result of the culture that it lived in at the time.
Yeah.
And I think that to a degree, to judge it by like modern like standards of like LGBTQ, it's a little unfair, but at the same time, I understand where that comes from.
Yeah, the thing is, like, actually back to the the Good Omens thing I wrote, or Good Omens I was talking about. I'm very upset about that because they made a modern TV show of that and they use this the term pansy is a slur for a gay man, and they just fling it around like it's nothing. It's like, you can't do that, and the entire thing is just shameless gay baiting. Like, the two main characters, Curly and Aziraphale, are just, they act entirely like a married couple, but they keep calling each other best friends. And it's like, the fact that you're willing to show a graphic depiction of Jesus's crucifixion, but you're not willing to show a gay couple except for in the background as a joke, it basically implies that homosexuality is more obscene than the aforementioned crucifixion, because you're effectively censoring yourself. And actually, in the original... in the original novel, because Good Omens is based off of a novel that was made in published in 1990, there's a line that says, people assumed 3 things about Aziraphale, and one of the lines is, he was gayer than a tree of monkeys on nitrous oxide. It's like, that's very offensive. It's not okay to compare black people to apes. It's not okay to compare gay people to monkeys on drugs. And even though that was written like 30 years ago, and this was written like, what, 40 years ago, it's like, it's still being published and it's still being read. Like, this is one of the main reasons I hate Shakespeare. It's because even though there might be merit to it, it's still, there's a lot of toxic ideals in it, and the fact that nobody goes back and edits it. Nobody goes back and edits any of the Shakespeare plays. They just produce them as they are, which is just laziness.
Yeah, but should it be re-edited? I mean, should we really go back to, like, old works and, like, specifically edit them to fit the culture that, like,
well, yes,
we live in? Because, like, I don't think we should. I feel like if you really want to understand, like, art, you have to understand the time that it's coming from and, like, the people that it's coming from, you know? It's
well,
like,
yes, but the thing is, like...
Because, like, we can, like, take this podcast, for example. Like, you and I, we're just talking about, like, things that are contemporary, but let's say like 30 years from now, all of a sudden it's not okay to bring up like nukes or whatever, and then should we really have to go back and like re-edit
No, I'm not saying
us
we
talking
should...
about nukes or whatever?
No, I'm not saying we should erase the original stuff from existence. I'm saying the stuff we make now. Like, part of the reason we make part of the main reason we reboot things is to fix problems in the old stuff. Like, if we realize, this thing is very misogynist and very racist, this teaches us that all women are whores and they should, cover themselves at all time. That's a very toxic ideal. And so if you're remaking something, you should probably, because every time you make a piece of art, you're essentially saying something. And if what you're saying is, all women are bad or all gays are bad or whatever that is, you should re-edit that. Like, I'm not saying we should delete the original work. Like, we need the original work to exist and remind us of how things were and how bad things could be if we let things get out of control. But we should no longer be making things that actively... Like, there's a line in Hamlet that says, "Frailty, thy name is woman." And that's Hamlet's supposed to be a character we root for. We're supposed to be agreeing with him. I mean, obviously he's got his flaws, and, I know some Shakespeare nut is going to give me an entire lecture in the comments, but it's just like, actually, while we're on the topic of Shakespeare, Richard II, there was actually a very recent, or maybe not, recent, in 2013, the BBC, the Shakespeare Company, made a production of that. I actually have the DVD, and that's kind of one of my guilty pleasures, because in that rendition, Richard is kind of seen as... is presented as basically transgender. Like, he's very androgynous and very feminine, and they explicitly say in the interviews with, like, David Tennant, who played Richard II, that they tried to make him very androgynous. And although a lot of the times when people do that, the reason they make characters androgynous is to sort of as a, this could be anyone, this could be you, or this could be somebody you know, but the thing is, Bolingbroke is presented as very masculine, and in the end, Bolingbroke kills Richard, and that's kind of portrayed as, like, a good thing. I actually do have an entire essay written on that I'm still working on. The point I was trying to make is, because you have, like, a symbol of femininity being defeated by a symbol of masculinity, and that being portrayed as a relatively good thing, that's definitely very misogynist, and you should not have done that. And it's, like, even the only other female character I can think of from that play is, Richard's wife, who's barely there to do anything. And honestly, I kinda don't like her. Like, at one point, Richard's having a panic attack, and she just scolds him, so, like, man up, repress your panic attacks. Actually, that's one of the things I really hate about the play in general, is it just... Like, Richard's having very realistic reactions to being, to everything around him. Like, he's losing people who are dear to him. Everything's that can go wrong is going wrong, and he's just having a complete mental breakdown. And everybody, like, including, like, if you read essays on that play, people, like, will shame him for that, and it's like, you're promoting an idea that having weakness and having an emotion is bad, when in reality, hey, 3 of your closest friends just died, and your kingdom's been taken over, and your army abandoned you because they thought you were dead. Having a panic attack to that's a very realistic, is a very realistic and understandable reaction, but because it's being portrayed as a bad thing, because Richard's being portrayed as, you know, this as weak and flimsy and a bad ruler, it's promoting this toxic ideal of, like, emotions are feminine and they need to be repressed, when we have, despite the fact we have lots and lots of research saying, no, don't do that, and this is still, and because that play is still being produced, can you hear the conversation going on behind me?
Barely. I can hear you over that, though.
Okay, good. I'm just making sure it's not overplaying. Yeah. Because of that, you know, yeah, again, I read a couple essays dissecting the play, and they do shame Richard for this, and it's like, that's proof in the pudding right there that because we haven't edited this thing, because we haven't changed it, it's promoting these ideals that are toxic. Right. Yes, thank you. We need to change these things because these things were not perfect, they were flawed. And yes, you know, part of it, like the rating system, like, there's a movie that's R-rated purely for having a gay wedding, and, you know, that right there shows you that, you know, how society has changed and evolved. And I would say, yes, we have to change art as we evolve to, you know, to get rid of, so it doesn't keep teaching these things that keep holding us back. So even though I do believe we should still have the original so that we can, you know, actually have a point of reference for how far we've come, and as sort of a warning of what could happen if we go back to this, as much as it's important to have the original, we do need to change things.
All right. Well, I wholeheartedly, honestly disagree with the whole concept of changing art, because while I do respect the fact that you're talking about we do need the originals and we do need to, like, look back at, like, what we used to do and, like, understand why that's wrong. If we're willing to go back and, like, re-edit, because the thing about art is it's not like it can be reflective of society, but it's also, like, the voice of a person, and, like, going back and, like, re-editing something specifically to fit, like, our modern morality, it's like, how many, like, great works, how many, like, things that have benefited society as a whole are we gonna have to go back and re-edit now? And the question is also, where do we stop with the re-editing?
No, I don't mean right go back and re-edit them. I just mean, like, when things are being published, like when we're making new versions of things.
Yeah, well,
like,
that's what you mean. Like, when you're talking about remaking, like, good things like that, it's like, the thing about re-editing things like that is it's all based on, like, our modern ideals of, like, morality. And again, like, 30 years from now, there's going to be there's going to be, like, new moralities, and we're going to have a lot of us are going to have an entirely different view on reality. And it's like, should we go back and re-edit, like, what's going on? And yeah, like, you're talking about keeping the originals, and I respect that, but I don't think that we should, like, censor these ideas simply because we look down upon them today. I think that we should understand those ideas and why they're wrong, and maybe why they could be potentially offensive, but at the same time, we shouldn't go back and, like, I think we should let them stand the way they are. Because, like, another thing is, like, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. In 1997, George Lucas, like, re-edited his original work and, like, sold it as, like, a new version called, like, the special edition, and that changed so much, like, in the movies themselves. Now, it's not, like, political changes or, like, narrative changes, really, but it's, like, little things, like changing the effects that were originally designed by, like, filmmakers in 1977 and making them into CGI so that they, quote-unquote, look better.
Oh, yeah, I remember my mom talking about that.
Yeah, or, like, even Steven Spielberg with, like, E.T. and how he changed, like, the shotguns that the police had to walkie-talkies. It's like I think the Star Wars thing in particular is huge for that because, like, you're talking about keeping the original works.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, we still have the original edits of those films, but they are, like, increasingly rare at this point. Like, I just saw, like, I was at a CD store today.
Mm-hmm.
The original cuts of Star Wars where they did not re-edit those filmmakers' original works or the original effects goes for like $100.
Yeah, actually,
it's a DVD set that goes for $100. That is insane.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Actually,
yeah,
you were saying
and it's all because
you were saying specifically that George Lucas went back and edited his own films, and that's kind of like,
and that's,
isn't that like, I mean, you're kind of talking about author integrity here, and it's kind of like, well,
exactly.
if the authors...
Well, yeah, that's also authorial integrity, of course, but at the same time, it's like those original cuts don't exist anymore. And while, yeah, you could say it's George Lucas's own property and he can do what he wants with it, that's also the work of, like, a ton of different filmmakers and a ton of different, like, prop designers.
Right, it's not just one person.
Musical editors, all these different elements that George Lucas himself didn't work on and that these other people worked on. That work is now lost. It's like, and it's not lost, but it's, like, extremely rare. And when you're talking about, like, rebooting things and, like, editing things to make them more appealing to our culture, what happens...
just appealing, more... what's the word I'm looking for? I guess more progressive, but that kind of makes me sound...
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, more progressive, more, like, for our modern progressive standards. What happens when, like, if that work just gets lost to time? And then what happens 30 years from now when, like, something in that remake is potentially offensive? And then we go back and we remake that. And it just becomes this endless cycle of, like, regurgitating the same thing and then changing little things to fit modern cultural standards.
Yeah.
Like, what happened, like, I personally believe that ideas need to, like, especially art in particular, because art is reflective of culture. I think that we need to we should understand if something's wrong. We should understand why it's wrong, but we need to I think it's important to keep art as it is. Like, you wouldn't go back into the Mona Lisa and, like you're talking about the Mona Lisa's filing, you wouldn't go back and, like, change it to a neutral expression or whatever. You wouldn't, like, go back and change... I
find that she already has a neutral expression, but I don't get why then Mona Lisa is so important.
Yeah, but what I mean by that is, like, we don't go back to, like, paintings and, like, paint over it because we think that this line doesn't belong here, we think that this line belongs there. And we don't go back to, like, old novels and be like, he shouldn't have said this, he should have said this instead, because that would be, like, re-editing art, and that just defeats the purpose of art in general, as it's a staple of human culture.
Yeah. And
so, like, when you're talking about, like, yeah.
I guess in that case I'm saying we should probably stop remaking things and just make new things.
Exactly. Like, that's what I mean. We shouldn't go back and re-edit things, but if you want to make a new story... Like, we're talking about the homophobia in Watchmen. If you want to make a story about, like, a LGBTQ superhero team, or you want to go back and you want to make a story about, like, something else or something along those lines, and you go right ahead. That's your prerogative, and that's your right as a human being, I think, to be able to have those ideas and to express them. I just don't think that going back and changing things to fit our modern standards is the right thing to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Because that's what the Nazis did, honestly.
Yeah.
Like,
now that you were mentioning that, I was remembering. Well, the thing is, the difference between me and the Nazis is I said we should keep the originals, but we should just change them when they're getting reprinted. And the Nazis just straight up burn books. Yeah. Yeah. Or in George Orwell's 1984. Where they just made up everything. I get what you're saying. Being reminded of those things, I guess I get what you're saying. Although, to be fair, I'm less extreme. I'm far less extreme. I don't know. I have some very hard opinions on a lot of things, but I am hopefully not on that level.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what were we saying? I think we've kind of...
Yeah, I think we've covered the LGBTQ thing, honestly.
Yeah, and there's a... Oh, hold on, my mom wants me. Oh, yeah, sure, of course. She just wanted her slippers back, I stole them.
All right.
What was I saying? I think I also wrote down, there's the cast isn't diverse, most of the characters are white, but I think we already talked about that earlier, and I think that's kind of...
and again, it's like reflective of the time, I think.
Yeah, I think that's
also
basically the LGBT stuff, but, you know, in a different... with a different group of the same thing. I did like I did like Rorschach's psychologist, though, I will say that.
Yeah.
And I did like how even after listening to Rorschach and very clearly being affected by everything he said, I do like, how he still went and, you know, tried to break up the fight between the two women. Oh, one thing actually before I forget about it, it's just a small thing, but I remember when you were reading Rorschach's lines, you were saying them very aggressively. But the art, like I haven't watched the movie or the TV series, but a lot of the times with the way he's drawn in the art, I get the sense that he's saying them very mundane and very monotone.
Yeah, like monotonely. Yeah, that's one thing, because like my impression of Rorschach comes from the version in the movie, which is very like gruff, which I think, going back to like the whole thing of being a product of the time, the movie was written in 2009.
It was?
The movie was made in 2009. Yeah, that's what I meant to say, not written. But Zack Snyder was the director, and he's like a huge Batman guy. And I think that the thing is, he wanted to try to make, always saw Rorschach as like a parody of Batman. So he gave him the stereotypical Batman voice at the time that Christian Bale did in The Dark Knight, where it's like, you bring your voice down to here, then you talk about some kind of like philosophical thing, and this city has just shown you that it's full of people ready to believe in good, and you know, where were the other drugs going? And yeah, that's where that voice comes from. And I think that actually works good for what Rorschach was going for as a parody. But I have heard many people say that Rorschach was supposed to be more monotone than that.
Yeah,
he's a lot more like,
I think it would have. I think it would have worked better, like just judging from the art, if he had much more of like a smooth, almost seductive voice, like not in a sexy way, just like in a very
seductive.
Not in a seductive way. If he just had,
you
like,
got the hots for Rorschach or something? Jeez.
I'm a lesbian. No, I meant like more so in just like a soothing, like. Just, you know, because, like, he's supposed to be very black and white, and he's supposed to be very, I know seductive usually has, like, a sexual connotation, but I'm more of just using it in, like, the more of, like, kind of like how the devils tempted the human beings. Like, they didn't necessarily use sex with it, but they were, you know, they were very easy to...
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about, though. That low voice that's, like, sort of edging you into something.
Yeah, that's very very convincing, and basically a voice that makes you feel comfortable and makes you trust the person.
Yeah. I got a joke for you people. There was a boy in school, and he was being taught the difference between the theoretical and the practical. And he goes up to his father and he asks, what's the difference between like the theoretical and the practical? He says, I'll teach you about that. First, go ask your mom if she would have sex with somebody for $1 million. And the boy goes up and he asks her, like, would you have sex with somebody for $1 million? And then she thinks about it and she's like, yeah, I probably would. Boy goes back to his father, tells him what she said. He says, now, theoretically, son, I'm a millionaire. Practically, I'm married to a whore. And that's a little boomer joke for you. I got that from Hardcore Henry. One of the deleted scenes. That's another good movie. If you get anything from this podcast, watch Watchmen and watch Hardcore Henry.
And
all right,
back.
so
actually, before we move on, I just realized the voice I was thinking of Rorschach, I couldn't put a name to it, but like Johnny Depp, like that was the kind of voice I kind of imagined him having. Like if we did an animated series, he's who I would hire to like be the voice actor for him. Okay, so we were talking about...
But honestly, I kind of like Rorschach with the rough voice, because if his whole thing is like he's trying to scare criminals, then it makes sense why he would talk like that.
Yeah, it does.
And it also makes him seem like a bit of an unlikable jerk, which like works.
Yeah. All right, so we talked about representation. We already talked about the comedian. The ending. At the end, when it's implied the newspaper will publish Rorschach's journal, it feels like it's supposed to mean something. Like all will be revealed, and it would have been all for nothing, but Rorschach's reputation discredits him. Why would anyone believe him if they think he's a nut job? Why would anyone believe the newspaper isn't making it up? And that's kind of a problem. Like you said, you put here kind of the point, but it's there to give the fans of the character hope that the truth will prevail, or to give fear that the utopia will collapse, deliberately open to interpretation. And it's like,
yeah, and that's another one of those things with when I'm talking about it being like morally gray, because like it's an ending that's open up to interpretation. Like you could go into many different directions with that. And actually there's 2 sequel series in particular that go in different directions with this. So the HBO series, in the HBO series, nobody believes Rorschach after that, and like there's this whole cult of Rorschach followers, and I guess we'll get into that when we start talking about the other interpretations. But in that sequel series, nobody believes Rorschach, and then in the comic book, The Doomsday Clock, which is a sequel of that, people do believe Rorschach, and then eventually Ozymandias is like charged or whatever. So again, it's open to interpretation. It goes in different directions. And I think the fact that it's left on such a vague ending like that, it's just like makes you think, you know? It's like,
I think I hate to be talking about Good Omens so much, but I've watched it recently, so it's fresh in my mind. That was a book there where the main problem was that the ending it had was complete. So, like, the entire purpose of the book and the series is to say, hey, humanity, we need to take responsibility for things like, you know, the main thing was climate change. We need to take responsibility for this. We can't sit around and wait for Jesus to come and save everybody. But the main problem with that novel is that it ends on it has a very distinct happy ending where where everything's solved and it goes back to normal, except for part of it going back to normal is we still have problems like climate change. And so I was saying like, once I'm done reading the book, it kind of leaves my mind because it ends on such a neat and tidy ending. And the other part of it is it ends on, like, 2 characters having a conversation. And this is very important for anyone who's writing. Pretty much the last scene you leave your readers on, that's going to subconsciously tell them that was the most important thing. Because that's the thing that they're going to think of, that's the thing that's going to be freshest in their memory. So the last scene should emphasize the most important thing. And the problem with Good Omens is it ended with 2 characters having dinner together, which kind of subtly implied that, you know, your interpersonal relationships kind of take priority over the world, and global climate change isn't that bad. And it's like, yeah, that was a main flaw. That was a novel that should have had an open ending. Like, there's a scene where all the characters are going to face off Satan, and I would have ended it right there had I been writing that novel. But it didn't. It kept going, and it tidied everything up. This doesn't do that, which is a good thing. I do believe the open ending is a good thing, because it does stick in your mind because of that, and it does leave you questioning. And I think the purpose of that is, like, sort of a, well, you decide what's going to be the end.
I don't think it's necessarily a you decide.
No, I mean,
feel like
not a
it's
you
more
decide, but it's like, you know, basically what will happen is probably more of what will happen in the real world. Like, if 100 years from now, all of our problems are fixed and global climate change is just a nightmare from the past, you know, then, of course, the comic will kind of lose its edge, but that, I would argue, that would definitely be a good thing. If climate change is no longer a problem, I don't care how much art becomes irrelevant, I would like that to change. But yeah, I do appreciate the open ending. I just feel like it should have ended somewhere else or on a different image, because like the fact that it ended on something where it's like, again, I don't think Rorschach's journal being published would do anything. I think it would just stay the way it was.
Yeah, especially considering the newspaper that it's attached to, because one of the extra things in the novel is that the newspaper it's attached to, the New Frontiersman, is like a very like right-wing, like far right-wing newspaper, which gets into the fact that like Rorschach like is a right-wing character.
Yeah, I probably should have picked that up looking back at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we've talked about, I think that wraps up our point on that. Do we
Yeah.
have anything more to say on that?
No, I think we pretty much discussed everything. Looks
Yeah.
like in the
I think
comic section.
the only thing we did is the real world documents, but we've kind of already talked about those. I didn't like them. I just they felt like an interruption from
Yeah,
the main
and
story.
yeah,
It felt like
I liked them
homework.
just because they.
It,
It didn't. To me, it didn't feel like homework. To me, it just felt like it's how do I describe it? It's world building, and I feel like
Yeah.
it really expands the whole concept. Because like the thing about comic books is that even when when they try to be self-contained, they're constantly building off of their own canon. It's
Yeah.
like, where would Daredevil be if not for like Spider-Man? And they have to include that in that universe. And where would like a lot of DC superheroes be if not for other DC superheroes? And it's just canon building on top of canon, building on top of canon.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I actually don't like many of the later MCU movies, is because they're so
You have to watch the
built upon themselves. Yeah, like there's no like, you have to go like back to 2008 to see the beginning of this universe. And for a lot of comic books, it's like they don't have the luxury of having a beginning that you can look at, because they constantly have to rewrite their beginnings.
Oh yeah, actually I was
like, yeah.
I just finished I think I said this earlier. I finished reading like the Kid Loki run for Journey into Mystery. Journey into Mystery now has like over 650 issues. So you can't like go back. And this is one of the things, like, actually, with Kid Loki, the first third of it was kind of difficult for me, because I felt like there was homework that I hadn't done, because I was like, wait a minute, I feel like I'm supposed to know what this is, but we haven't explained that in this run. And I actually just started, I think I just finished the first issue of Loki, Agent of Asgard. But I remember I actually haven't started the second issue, because there's a line where Loki says, "Oh, I can't." He tells Thor, "I can't remember a time where I ever hated you," and it's like that made me feel like, wait, hold on, I feel like I missed something very important. Like, I will accept that this is a new iteration, because especially with the Thor comics, they have Ragnarok and the gods are constantly being reincarnated, so it's easier to start. You know, it might be an easier comic to get into because of that, because a lot of the times they keep having a reset button, so you can just jump into something, and a lot of it's in media res, and it's written for, you know, to be friendlier to new readers. Because actually that's the main reason it took me so long to get into comics. Like, I wanted to get into them for years, but the main problem was, like, they're expensive, and I kept feeling like every time they had a few at the library, but every time I picked one up, I felt like there was homework I hadn't done, which is actually a good thing in this comic, because I didn't get that feeling. Like, it definitely starts in media res, but it doesn't, it keeps you up to date. You didn't have to, I didn't feel like I was missing something. I felt like, everything was explained as we went along.
Yeah, and like the whole thing about Watchmen is like anything you want to know is explained within the comic itself if you read like the extra stuff, and that's what I like about how it's self-contained. And I think that's what makes it more comprehensive than most comic books that I really love, like The Dark Knight Returns. That's another comic book that like I love, that's like a lot like Watchmen, but at the same time that also has to follow like all this different canon, and you have to know who Green Arrow is, and you have to know who Superman is to understand it. But yeah,
that's freaking annoying.
That's one of the things that I love about Watchmen, is how self-contained it is. And yeah, a lot of the stuff is later expanded upon in like the Before Watchmen series, but you don't have to read those to understand what's going on, or you don't have to understand what happens in those.
Yeah, that's like extra stuff.
Yeah.
What is it? Yeah, I think that's that point covered. We're into the final section, which is just things worth mentioning, and the only point I wrote down in here is how a lot of this stuff is still going on in the real world, but I think we pretty much already talked about that enough.
Yeah, we definitely talked about that a lot.
We already talked about Bob Dylan's music.
We did, yeah.
We've mentioned the HBO series and this Zack Snyder movie, but I don't really. Do you have anything more to say on that? Because I don't really feel like we've gotten into
Yeah, I
that
do
at all.
actually. The Zack Snyder movie is the main thing that got me into Watchmen. Like a lot of like Watchmen purists will be like, oh, you have to read the graphic novel first because Zack Snyder doesn't get the point of Watchmen because the whole point was blah 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 blah, and there's too much action and da da da, and it's like Zack Snyder. Like, granted, he's a comic book fan, and that's his greatest strength and his greatest weakness as a director. Because like you look at his other movies, like 300 is one of like I think his best movies that he ever made. The whole thing about that movie is he literally just used the graphic novel as a storyboard.
Right.
And the thing about 300 though is that's a graphic novel that's straightforward enough and like nuance free enough to be like you can have a limited view of that movie because it's a basic story, you know,
you can
and
just
that's
read
what
it can be a popcorn movie or a candy floss
Zack
movie.
Snyder is good at making basic stories. I think it's a popcorn movie. You know, you get some bros, you watch it, it's a great time.
Yeah.
Watchmen is definitely a hell of a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And I think that the thing about he tried to like he didn't really miss the point, I don't think. I just think he wasn't as good at conveying it as he probably wishes he was because again, like Watchmen is a large novel and there's a lot that like is missed, especially particularly in the theatrical cut because like if you're gonna watch the movie, the best cut to watch is the director's cut because while that doesn't include the Tales from the Black Freighter stuff, the Tales from the Black Freighter stuff is like poorly edited into like the ultimate cut.
Right.
But the director's cut, it gives you everything you need to know that's from the novel. Like anything besides Tales of the Black Freighter that you like in the novel is in the director's cut somewhere.
Right.
But even then, the director's cut is like 3 hours long, and the theatrical cut of Watchmen is like 2 hours and 38 minutes long.
Yeah. That's still a long time.
Yeah,
for a
obviously
movie.
he wasn't able to incorporate everything from the novel, and he's more of an action director than anything else. He's really great with visuals. Right. So a lot of the action in the movie is very stylized, and I think that that's one thing that a lot of like Watchmen purists don't like, because there's not a lot of action in Watchmen. It's a lot more talk than it is fight.
Right.
And the fact that there are fight scenes in Watchmen, a lot of like purists think that that's like missing the point of the novel. I don't think it misses the point. Because like the whole thing about them is they're superheroes. Like, of course they're going to be able to fight at like better than most humans because like that's how they're alive. Because like if superheroes, like Watchmen wants to talk about what if superheroes were real.
Right.
Superheroes are real, actually, and a lot of them get their asses beat constantly. Because you have to be like heavily trained to even stand a chance at being a superhero. So while the action is stylized and it is like very violent because of it, it makes sense within the context of the universe, I think.
Right.
To a degree. Maybe it's not how Alan Moore would have envisioned it, but it does make sense.
Yeah. I think part of that just might be, especially here in America, when people see a superhero movie, they immediately expect a lot of action. So, you know, I think part of that might have just been Alan Moore just trying, or not Alan Moore, but Zack Snyder trying to please the average moviegoer.
Exactly.
And getting caught between, caught between pleasing fans. Because you can't please everyone. And I am a very much... we talked about this earlier when we were talking about editing things and censorship. I was saying that if you want my philosophy a lot of the times is if you want the comic book, go read the comic book, because I do believe part of the purpose of rebooting things is to explore them in a new light, like that's why I like the comics and I like the MCU, and they're very different, and that's a good thing, because if we just saw the comics taken directly to the screen, I feel like we would be missing out on a huge opportunity to, do something new with them. And I know, I'm remembering Two animated TV shows, Earth's Mightiest Heroes and Avengers Assemble. And you and I both really like Earth's Mightiest Heroes, which unfortunately got cut so that they could do Avengers Assemble, so it would line up more with the MCU. And I remember you being really upset about that, and I was really upset about that as well. But I think it's a little unfair to Avengers Assemble because Earth's Mightiest Heroes was primarily like an action-adventure drama, while Avengers Assemble is more so an action-adventure comedy. Yeah. And so I feel like comparing the two is very unfair. As well,
I don't think it's unfair. I think it's because they're both based off the same thing, and they're both like they both existed at the same time, and they both directly relate to each other because one of them got canceled so that the other can be made. I don't think it's an unfair comparison to compare. It's like saying that Teen Titans Go and the original Teen Titans is an unfair comparison because while they are in two completely different genres, they are all connected by the same title, and in the case of Teen Titans Go, by the same voice actors.
Yeah.
So yeah, like tonally they're different, and you can talk about those differences, but just because they're different doesn't mean that you can't compare the two.
Yeah.
Like I'm talking about Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns. Like those are two completely different novels with two completely different characters that, while have the same themes and have the same political discussions, approach them in two very different ways. But just because they're different doesn't mean you can't compare the two.
True. I don't know. I do think it's unfair though to bash Assemble just because it was the one that cut Earth's Mightiest Heroes, because that was not something that the writers wanted to do. Like I think.
Yeah, granted, yeah. It's
that
also
was the higher ups.
There's probably a term
interfering.
for this. Yeah, there's probably a term for this, but I also just like to call it the Joe effect. Basically, my whole theory on this is like, you ever hear the show Blue's Clues?
Yeah.
Yeah, like you know how like around like season 4, 5 or whatever, the main host Steve was replaced by this other dude named Joe.
No.
And a lot of kids stopped watching because of that.
Yeah.
Well, that's what happened, right? Because like the dude who played Steve, I think, like he was getting older and he wanted to move on to different things, so they eased this like new host called Joe into it. And the thing about, I like to call it the Joe effect because a lot of people don't like Joe because he replaced Steve.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that he was basically the same thing, just a different person playing the character.
Right. Yeah.
Like, my whole thing is people stop watching because of that. And like, Joe could have been far superior to Steve. Joe could have been the best host Blue's Clues could have ever had. Joe could have like made Blue's Clues into like a Nobel Prize, Emmy-winning series, and he could have cured cancer simultaneously, and he still would always be remembered as the asshole that replaced Steve.
Yeah, and that's kind of
that's the same thing with Avengers Assembled.
Yeah, I really wish Earth's. Yeah, but the thing is, I kind of like both. Like, I know we've gotten a little bit off topic, but I really, like, I enjoy Avengers Assemble as a comedy because that's what it's trying to be, and it is legitimately funny at certain points, but I remember you and I were both, actually mostly you, were very annoyed that,
yes,
when it came on. I remember specifically you were upset that, they did an episode with Dracula.
Yeah, that's dumb.
Yeah, but I think, again, because...
Like, I've known plenty of other series that have done that too, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing is because it's a comedy, it can get away with a lot more because it's like, yes, you're like, oh, this is ridiculous and stupid. It's like, well, yeah, it's a comedy. That's, you know...
Well, yeah, but that's also
it.
the thing. It's like, yeah, you can say that it's a comedy, but like, and you can say that they're doing two different things, but...
Yeah.
I think deep down there's like, granted it's subjective, but I think deep down we all know that like sometimes one interpretation is better than another interpretation. I think you know it's like with Teen Titans. Like Teen Titans Go is a completely different interpretation from the original Teen Titans series because it's like Go is a comedy.
Yeah.
And the original is like is an action.
It's a drama
thing.
It's the same. It's the same thing.
I mean, it's got comedy in it. It's somewhat of a comedy too because it's designed for kids, but at the same time, it's also like a drama. Like there's character development in it, and it's all about like where these characters go.
Right.
And then Teen Titans Go is all about, now granted, it's a well-written comedy. I'm not saying that it's a poorly written comedy.
Yeah, I haven't watched
But-
Teen Titans Go in
yeah.
like a couple of years. I remember it came out. I watched a bunch of episodes. I was like, it was all, for the most part, it was okay. But there were definitely a couple episodes where it's just like completely fell flat for me. I don't
Exactly.
I don't like watching characters be idiots, and there were a couple of episodes where the entirety of the comedy was, let's be idiots, and it's like, yeah, I don't like that, I'm leaving.
Yeah, so like there's two different interpretations,
Yeah.
but I think sometimes one can be better than the other, you know? It's like yeah, and I think that it is fair to judge two interpretations because of that.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
really wish Earth's Mightiest Heroes had done their Ragnarok storyline, though.
I wish, yeah.
I am so upset. Like, you can actually even see it. Like, the last episode of that series, they did Galacticus, and that feels so forced. It's almost as if they realized, oh, like somebody. I think what they were planning to do was they wanted to do like at the end of the first season, they left it on a cliffhanger where Loki had taken over Asgard, but I think they wanted to do the same thing with the season 2, but since they realized, oh frick, we're being canceled, they're like, well, we don't want to be we don't want to be assholes and leave our audience on a cliffhanger that will never be resolved. So let's quick write this Galactus episode so that at the very least we can end on a bang. It's like, yeah. I don't know. I really did not like that episode. But we've gotten completely off topic.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're technically, because we are talking about different interpretations, and I think that's the main crux of, like, why people don't like the Zack Snyder movie, and why people do like the Zack Snyder movie, because for a lot of people, a lot of Watchmen fans that I know, personally, haven't read the comic. They've only seen the movie, and they really like the movie. And I feel like, in between those two interpretations, like, yeah, you could argue which one is better than the other. I think that somewhat the comic is better than the movie, but the movie, that doesn't mean the movie's bad.
Yeah.
It just means that I think it's a pretty good movie. And it does have those same characters in it, going through those same arcs. So it's like either one I think is alright.
Yeah, it still has the same, it's okay. It still has the same backbone and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only time I really compare the source material to reboots and stuff is generally when the one thing did something better than the other.
Yeah.
Cause like when we do next time when we do the Jessica Jones, I'm probably going to be comparing the TV show. Hopefully, I don't talk about the TV show too much because it's horrible. But but I know in the third section where we talk about things worth mentioning, I'm going. Hold on a moment. Okay, there we go.
I still gotta read those yet, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I actually just finished reading them a day or two ago. They are really good, but I know I'm going to be comparing them a lot because the TV show cocked up so much while the comic got so much right. And the comic's not like the comic's not deep or anything. It's nothing new or renaissance-y. It's not going to change anything, but it's inoffensive and it's very fun to read and it gets the job done. And I just deeply appreciate that after just such a train wreck the TV show was.
Yeah.
Which is ironic because we both watched the TV show before we read the comics. Well, you're going to read the comics, but you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so it's like my philosophy is like, you can't get mad at something merely for not being what the source material was. There is, to some extent, you have to, you know, I do believe to some extent you do have to remain a little bit faithful to the source material, but I think it also depends on how you market it. Because, like, again, to go back to Teen Titans Go, if you market it, I don't think you should get mad at it because Teen Titans Go is a comedy and it's marketed as a comedy. It's not misleading about what it is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you don't like Teen Titans in the form of a comedy, then, you know, why did you even tune in to watch?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think
I tuned in to watch because I was like a fan of the old series, but yeah.
I just tuned in to watch because everybody kept saying it was so bad and kept throwing hissy fits over. It's like, okay, I've got to see what this is now. And it's like, I watched it and it's like, it's actually pretty decent. Actually, the funny thing...
Yeah, it's not bad. I don't like it as much as I like the original series.
Yeah, because, you know, we like drama more than we like comedy. And,
yeah, that And granted, there's probably also a nostalgia thing, just because I grew up with the series. Like,
Oh,
it
yeah,
started
that
airing,
too.
I was like 4.
Yeah, I need to get the DVD release of that because I haven't seen the complete series. I watched a couple episodes because we didn't have those channels available to us when I was a kid. We had basic cable. I think
Yeah,
Cubo was the only kids channel we had. And then we just
yeah.
had news, sports, and then a bunch of channels that played movies. But so I think we've talked about that enough. The movie and the HBO series.
Well, we
What
didn't talk
is
about the
the
HBO series.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because the
Do you
HBO
wanna?
series is, like I said before, it was a sequel series. And the thing about that is the way that it's supposed to be set in, like, 2019, but, like, in the Watchmen universe. So, like, politics are, like, completely different than they are. It's still supposed to sort of be reflective of what's going on now, but it's also, like, completely different in a way.
Yeah. Like
Because,
an
like,
updated
yeah.
version.
And I have, like, the series, it confuses me. Because, like, there are some episodes where I'm like, there's one episode in particular where I'm like, this series is great. Like, it's
Yeah.
well directed and the music's all right and it's like, it's great. And then the rest of the series, I'm like confused because I'm like, wait a minute, why are they doing this? Wait a minute, this is kind of dumb.
Yeah, it kind of feels like
Why are they doing that? Why are we focusing on this character, not that character?
yeah, kind of feels like how I
And I think a
felt.
lot of that, yeah,
Kind of feels like how I felt
a
when I
lot of that.
was
Sorry, yeah,
watching Doctor Who.
no, go ahead. Yeah, because like a lot of that also has to do with like the fact that I watched the movie and read the comic book before I saw the series. But like, so this isn't like a spoiler or anything,
Mm-hmm.
but in
I'm
the series, the way Rorschach's journal is interpreted is like because it's attached to like a right-wing newspaper,
mm-hmm.
it eventually forms this like cult of like white supremacists
Oh dear.
or whatever that wear the Rorschach masks and are all like, "We're gonna bring it back to those liberals and minorities or whatever."
Oh dear.
I'm a redneck boy. I'm a redneck boy in my redneck town, and I don't like me. I like me some white people, and I'm Rorschach. And it's like, how it's kind of insulting to the original story because, like, yeah, Rorschach was far right, and Rorschach was sexist and all. I never took him for a racist,
Yeah.
and there are plenty of instances where he could have easily been racist. Now you could argue, like, oh yeah, like maybe he's racist towards the Japanese because he supports the dropping of the atomic bomb, or you could argue that because the newspaper that he was reading like defends the KKK, that Rorschach probably also believes that. But at the same time, there's so much more you could have done with Rorschach having a cult following him.
Yeah, and
'Cause-
also like
yeah.
his misogyny has more to deal with his PTSD. He was abused by his mother,
Exactly.
and he projects his abuse onto all other women. And even then, he's still against like rape. Like he's still
Yeah, like
he
well, he's
still
against
goes
rapists.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Like he's still like he's very insulting and dismissive towards a lot of women, but he's still like he's still under that more seems to be like again back to his PTSD, and I don't think I know they called Rorschach like they kept calling him a queer. I really hate that word, but it's like I don't think did he ever. Correct me if I'm wrong, but did he ever actually like insult any minorities, like the LGBT minorities? Because I.
Oh yeah.
He did?
Yeah, he called he said that Ozymandias was a possible homosexual, and to him that's like a moral no-no. He's
I remember
actually,
him saying possible homosexual, but I don't
he
remember.
did. Yeah, I can bring up.
I don't
the
remember.
actual
I didn't get the
page.
feeling that was an insult.
He
didn't
definitely, if it wasn't like an insult, it definitely was like a it shows that he has a negative connotation towards like, because he also calls like a Silhouette dying a quote-unquote victim of her own indecent lifestyle. So he is a very like homophobic man, as well as being sexist. But at the same time, I think this also just like, he's still one of my favorite characters, actually, because of these flaws, because he's so well developed.
Yeah, I still like him as a character too, but I'm having some very horrifying realizations. As I think Turns out I'm still homophobic, even though I don't realize it.
Well, I mean, liking a homophobic character doesn't
something-
necessarily make you a homophobic, unless you agree
No, I'm
with
saying
that
the-
homophobia.
No, I'm
like,
saying...
Sorry, go
Hold
ahead.
on, you're cutting out.
Oh.
No, the thing I'm saying is because I didn't notice the homophobic things, that's because it didn't trigger in my mind as being wrong. Something that was bad didn't trigger in my mind as being wrong. That's what we call ingrained homophobia and ingrained racism. It's kind of like how a lot of people keep using the term queer and pansy, and it's like, or how other people will, use the N-word and not think it's wrong. It's like, yeah, that's, they're not trying to be dismissive, but they are. Or like if you've watched Zootopia, you did watch Zootopia, where Judy does that whole thing of like, clearly that
I saw the first half and stopped watching.
you did.
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of it.
Oh, okay. Well, you probably didn't see it, but there's a scene where she says like, "Oh, all the predators are dangerous. They're clearly reverting back to their aggressive biology." When really not. They're being shot with drugs. People are... It's hard to explain to somebody who hasn't watched the movie, but basically somebody's sniping them with drugs that's making them act crazy. But because people are bigoted against predators, they assume that it's just their natural biology and that's how they are. And Judy, the main character, who's somebody we're supposed to like, even falls prey to that. And what I'm saying is I'm kind of being like Judy right now, where it's like I'm reading this and I'm not realizing that it's homophobic and transphobic, and that's just means that I still have a lot of that'd explain a lot of the stress that I feel.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, it's like, again, I like Rorschach because he's flawed, and it's like, if you were to judge every single character, or every single person in general, by like flaws like that, it's like, how many look at the founding fathers or whatever of America, and like look how they're revered or whatever. And they're like, they are racist, and they are like sexist and stuff like that. But that doesn't make them like bad people. Like, first of all, they're products of the time they're living in. But secondly, it's like, you can disagree with somebody even on something major like that, and still and still respect them as a person, or still like them as a person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went through this huge phase where I was like obsessed with Charles Lee, and
Exactly,
to some extent, I actually originally was writing like a novel about him, where a historical fiction novel where it was supposed to be really sad and really tragic. But now I haven't completely thrown out the idea, but now like I'm thinking about returning to it and writing it as sort of like a black comedy where which is just about like the founding fathers in general, where they're going back and they're all basically going through the revolution, and they are all like kind of they're shamelessly flawed. Whoops, hold on, can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I hit a button and I didn't know if it exited me out. Where they're all like just shamelessly, like Hamilton's like shamelessly a whorehound, and George Washington is like shamelessly racist and like constantly passive aggressive and very dismissive of everyone around him, and it's played up for comedy. But they're still, on one hand, they're being bad people, but on the other hand, they're still doing something that's necessary to create a better world. So that's an idea I had. I don't know if I'll do it. I have like 30 different novel ideas for books, and I've got all of them in various stages of completion. So, does that wrap up the HBO series? Because I haven't watched it. I've heard
really,
about it,
because like that was just one thing, right? But like, there's also a lot of more confusing stuff in there, and I think a lot of it has to do with spoilers. But like, I didn't like the main character in the movie or in the series. I mean, I think that she's like I forget her name. Honestly, her name is like Sister Knight or something, and she's just like, I just think she's boring, and she's meant to be played off as this character that's like, well, first of all, she's a black woman, right? So like that whole like representation thing is like, they have that a lot in this series, and a lot of the series is based on like modern like identity politics, particularly like racial politics and stuff. And while I feel like it's like Watchmen has always been a political story, and it's fine to talk about that kind of stuff. I feel like they just sort of
The
not go
characters
too
at the
far.
heart.
It's like because Watchmen is known for its like gray morality, right? But
Right.
the show likes to be like, all right, these are objectively the good guys, and these are objectively the bad. Like the Rorschach people are objectively bad guys, and you
Yeah,
know
you're not supposed to like
the
them.
cops in the masks are objectively the good guys, and
Right.
like yeah, but the thing about it is like portraying its morality as black and white. You know, obviously it's a racial thing, but like portraying it as black and white completely negates the original point of the comic book.
Yeah.
And the whole character, like she's a black woman or whatever, and like really she's not given too much character beyond that. Like any actual character development that she gets is completely based off of like the men in her life.
Yeah, that's
Like she's not special because of what she does as a character. She's special because of this
And
is who
she's
she's
special because
related
she.
to.
Yeah, she's
Or
special
this
because who she's
yeah,
related to.
exactly. And I
Sorry, I
think
keep
that
interrupting.
if they were going for like a progressive message, which I think they were trying to go for, it completely falls flat on its face because of that.
Yeah, like Into the Spider-Verse. You and I watched that together on my birthday. With Miles
No,
Morales.
I think you left like after that came out, but I did see it.
No,
Yeah,
no.
that's
Okay, yeah. Well, like the main thing I was trying to get at is Miles Morales is black, but that's never brought attention to, and I think that's the best way to do representation. He's not, he's biracial. He's black and Hispanic, but he is a character that happens to be black and Hispanic. He has a character outside just his
exactly.
race, and I think that's the best way to
Yeah,
do
and that's
it.
That's why I love that movie, honestly, because like it somehow made me
Oh yeah, that's a
relate
great
more.
movie.
I somehow relate more to Miles Morales than I do to Peter Parker, which is weird because I've always been a Spider-Man fan. I've always been a Peter Parker fan.
Yeah, well, I think
Like-
that's just because Miles is written a lot more just realistically in general. Like the very first thing we see him doing is jamming
yeah, I
out
mean-
on his headphones, which is
Yeah,
something
but I don't
we've
even
all
think
done.
it's necessarily because of that. Because like a lot of like, I think I relate to him on a personal level, just because like a lot of the stuff that goes on in his life, like okay, that's sort of like I can relate that to this going on in my life, and I can do the same thing with Peter Parker. But I feel like Miles Morales is somehow closer to me
Yeah.
because of that. And I think that when we talk about like representation and stuff like that,
that's the best way to do it because like I'm not a 14-year-old African American teenager living in Brooklyn.
You're
going to,
cutting
like,
out there.
All right.
Oh, you're back. Okay, there you
Am I
go.
good? All right. Yeah. So like
Yeah, I
I'm
think so.
not like a 14, 15-year-old African American boy living in Brooklyn and going to like a fancy tech school, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, I can still relate to this character. And I feel
Yeah,
like that's how you do representation, and I feel like that's what the series is missing.
Yeah. Or like,
Like,
again to
yeah.
mention the Jessica Jones comics, in that they do LGBT representation very well because, even though, because like at one point, bigotry is brought up in the second volume, I believe. There is, there are many characters throughout it that are just LGBT, and that's kind of seen as normal. And they, it's a comic with LGBT characters, but it's without being an LGBT comic, and that's the thing I really like about it. So, yeah.
But yeah, that was one of like the series shortcomings. That being said, there's one character in the series. He shows up in the first episode. His name is like Looking Glass. He's the best character in the whole series because of one episode.
Yeah. I feel
Yeah.
like I kind of feel like we should probably drift away from the HBO series because I haven't
Yeah,
seen
definitely.
that.
Yeah,
And so,
because I think So
yeah.
we're just going into my own thoughts here, but yeah, that's the HBO series. So what else?
All right, the one thing we said here is the one thing, I think the last point here is, okay, well, actually, there are two joke points. The last one was just want to mention just some random guys' videos. And I think we already talked about that because you said that was how you got into it.
Yeah.
But I kind of like that just because it's taking, because this is something, speaking of, like, the fan works, because, the next point is actually Alan Moore fans saying Rorschach is bad, but,
Yeah.
before we get into that directly, just when I was looking through DeviantArt, and actually just with a lot of comics in general, a lot of it seems to go either one way, actually just with a lot of fan work in general, I've noticed that a lot of it seems to go either one way or the other. It's either really dark, or it's like a parody, like a comedy. Like, things are like, really cute and chib versions. And it's kind of, like, to some point I kind of get that. Like, in my experience, like, a lot of the times people will write fan fiction in the genre that is opposite to, the source material. And, like, the main reason I think fan fiction exists, well, there are a few reasons. Number one, it just acts as like a supplement, like while the fans are waiting for the next season to be released, they've got the fan fiction and the fan art to sort of tide them over, or if the series is ended and they still want more, they have that to sort of, keep them going and keep the fandom alive. But the other reason I thought the main thing I think it exists is because there are things that the source material just isn't going to be allowed to do because it's the source material. Like, I don't think you could ever have a canon Watchmen comedy series. Like, I don't think you could ever successfully make a parody of that because that's not what anyone expects from it. However, a fan could make like
I actually do know a YouTube video that does that, and it works because of the fact that nobody would expect that, but
Yeah.
that's for another time.
Well, what I was saying is, like, a fanfic could perfectly get away with writing, like, a ridiculous out there comedy of something very serious because it's a fanfic and because it's not tied to those, it doesn't have those rules.
Yeah.
Like, with mainstream stuff, as good as it can be and as much as we like it, it's always going to be a slave to what the audience wants. People want to make money, and it doesn't matter how much the author wanted to put something in there. If people, if the company believes less people will buy it, they're not going to do it. Like, earlier I mentioned the Warriors Cat series. That's written by a team of authors, and a lot of the authors, because especially, it was originally a team of 3 authors, but now it's like a team of, I think, almost a dozen. I don't know, I've kind of left that fandom. But one of the original authors really wanted to have a gay relationship, but their publishers specifically said, no, you can't do that, because if you do that, the books are going to be banned in several countries, and, we're not willing to lose that money. And I know for a fact that authors actually want to have these gay characters because they've actually written gay fan fiction under their real name and posted it on fanfic websites because they wanted to have that, but they weren't allowed to because their publishers just flat out said, no, you're not doing that, we won't let you do that.
Yeah.
So, but, again, fanfics, we don't have those boundaries. We might not get as much notoriety as everybody else, as the mainstream thing, but, we have more freedom with that. So that was more so what I was saying. And, like, again, back to them, it's just some random guy videos. That's full-on comedy of, like, Rorschach and Deadpool, who are from 2 different franchises entirely, so automatically by that.
And they're, like, 2 completely different characters, and I think that's why they work so well together in that series.
I love that one line where it just says, how the hell did I end up being the good cop in this?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. And actually, have you been watching the more recent It's Just Some Random Guy videos?
Nah, I stopped watching years ago, but yeah.
Yeah, because he went on hiatus. But, yeah, actually, they do, one of the main points in that is that, basically Deadpool uses a time machine to go back and, win all the arguments. Like, basically, what the premise is that the DC and the Marvel characters have decided to stop doing their arguments because they think that it starts up too much conflict and too much hatred, and it just, let's just enjoy the movie and leave it as it is and just, watch it passively. But Deadpool is upset because now he's not going to be able to get his jabs in, and so he uses a time machine to go back and win every argument up until that point. And basically, And basically that causes like this huge rupture in the time stream that all the characters have to fix. And one of the main things in that is that Rorschach, there's past Rorschach, and then there's the random guy video Rorschach who's been interacting with Deadpool the whole time, and now he's kind of become less black and white from having to just deal with this chaotic force, because he's been forced to compromise because he can't kill Deadpool, but he has to work with Deadpool in order to fix things, and so it's like, that was actually something really interesting, but I'm pretty sure in the source material, if you change that, if you had Rorschach become not black and white, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would bitch and moan about that.
Yeah, definitely, I would, definitely.
Yeah. Whereas, I would kind of say it's like, whereas because it's fan fiction, we allow it to do that.
Yeah.
So, I think that's the only other point I have regarding thing is actually kind of a joke thing. Is shipping a thing in this fandom? Because I like the idea of Night Owl and Rorschach being an old married couple. Parentheses, yes, I know you think that's weird. I'm deep in the shipping rabbit hole. End parentheses.
I just responded back with Rorschach saying, no.
Yeah, you just have this picture of Rorschach looking at me with just no. I just thought that was funny and worth mentioning.
Yeah.
Yeah, admittedly, that was kind of just something I wanted to ask, because, each fandom is different and depending on what it focuses on. And
and I think the thing that you're going to find is, like, a lot of, like, these higher-tier comic books, like Watchmen and, like, Dark Knight Returns, and a lot of these comic books that are aimed at more of an adult audience, they don't typically have a following that, like, engages in, like, the whole, like, shipping thing, just because... Probably mostly because most of the fans are males in general, but...
Well, no, I will now point out that a lot of, actually within the comic
I'm
itself,
not saying that there aren't male fans of comics or whatever that don't do the shipping thing. Like, I get the appeal of it, but a lot of these these Watchmen tier novels, these types of fandoms don't necessarily have that.
Yeah, they have an older audience, and this audience existed before fan fiction was a normal thing, so they kind of still see it as weird. But actually, I will point out that fan fiction actually is addressed within, I just now remember this, there's at one point Sally mentions that somebody made like a pornographic comic of her. Yeah,
it's not like fan fiction, that's more just like a porn thing.
Yeah, but it's still fan work.
I mean, you could technically say that, yeah, but it's not supposed to be like, oh, look at that, that's a good thing because she has fans. It's more like, oh, that's disgusting, and she, like, why does she like that or whatever?
Yeah, well, I don't know, that kind of comes back to just, like, without getting into the whole discussion of just pornography in general, like, my rule with pornography is, like, so long as it's not promoting anything dangerous, so, like, I don't think you should portray rape as a good thing, and if you're doing that in your pornography, I think that's wrong. But, like, just banning it entirely, it's like, I think that's kind of getting at the wrong, I think you're kind of fighting the wrong battle there.
Yeah, I don't think it's really supposed to be talking about, like, the ethics of pornography. I think it's just supposed to be talking about, like, she's showing her daughter this porn that somebody made of her from, like, the 40s. Like, in her own head about the golden years or whatever.
Yeah, because she's like, oh, I kind of like to remember when people used to want me and fling themselves at me. And it's like, I can see where she's coming with that. Like, you don't want...
I'm there right now.
Yeah.
Why aren't people attracted to me?
Yeah, same thing with me.
I read so many comic books. Why don't you love me, Sarah? Anyway.
Yeah. But anyways, so I think that's kind of the discussion on, like, the fandom. Do you have anything else to say on the fandom?
To say on the fandom?
I mean, we've got right here Alan
Moore fans saying that Rorschach is bad. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people are like, because of the flaws that I'm talking about with Rorschach, they're like, oh, Alan Moore didn't intend you to like Rorschach, so if you like Rorschach, then you're just a dumb boy because Alan Moore doesn't want it. And it's like, I don't care what Alan Moore wants.
Yeah, the author is dead.
I like the novel.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care about Alan Moore, that Karl Marx-looking communist homeless person. I don't care if this man says that Dr. Manhattan was like a libertarian whatever. I don't care if he says that Dr. Manhattan was a woman the whole time. It's like
it's transgender.
Shut up. You're perfect. That's what I want to say.
Yeah.
Like, stop ruining this for me.
I like Rorschach as a character, and I feel like he deserves respect because of that. Because he's so flawedly written. Flawed.
Yeah.
Like, he's a flawed character, and he was intended to be written like that. I don't care whether or not I'm supposed to like him, because I like him.
Like, again, back to the Jessica Jones Netflix series. I was supposed to like Jessica, but she's just a hypocritical bitch, so
Exactly.
I hate her. And that's and for that reason exactly, like, I wasn't supposed to like the villain Kilgrave, but I ended up liking him merely because it's like, mainly just because he was the only one who actually was having fun in the whole freaking thing, so...
Exactly.
You know,
Hashtag
it's like,
Kilgrave did nothing wrong.
No,
And
he did do a
the
lot
thing
wrong.
about-
He did do a lot wrong.
thing about-
It's just that I liked him better because he was just the only thing that was actually entertaining me. But I wasn't supposed to like him.
Exactly. Rorschach is great character. All these people in these little Watchmen forums saying like, "Oh, you're a bad person if you like Rorschach because he's written as a bad person." It's like, I like him because he's written as a bad person. Buddy, fight me.
Yeah.
All right, and that's...
just because a character isn't morally good doesn't mean they aren't a good character.
Rorschach is great. I like the comedian. Comedian's cool.
I don't like the comedian, but I think
I
just because
don't
I think he's boring.
I don't like no Ozymandias. I think Ozymandias looks like I think he wears too much purple.
Actually, I do like Ozymandias' design.
Yeah, he's got a good
Purple is...
design. I'm trying to find a way to insult thing. My point is,
Whoop, you
don't
keep getting
insult
that.
me for liking Rorschach.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's people who define themselves on, like, what they like, and it's like, you're kind of being a little unhealthy. Like, you know, again, back to, I said earlier, Richard II is a guilty pleasure of mine. Like, I do believe Richard II is a bad play, but I still like it just because it's... Admittedly, Richard, I'm kind of gay for Richard. Like, I know Richard's, actually, I keep saying I'm a lesbian. I should probably specify a little bit. I'm actually, it's called gynosexual. I had a realization about myself a little while ago. Gynosexuality is basically when you're attracted to femininity and feminine presentation regardless of a person's sex and gender identity. But, and that's how I identify, because, like, throughout my, you know, like, I when I was watching Thor growing up, I had the hots for Loki, and it's like, that's kind of why for a while I was very confused on my sexuality, but it's like, no, he's very feminine visually wise, and I like that, and Richard II's very feminine, and I like that. Richard is borderline transgender woman. He definitely is transgender coded, but whether or not he's non-binary or a trans woman is up for debate. But, you know, back to what I was saying, is that's a guilty pleasure of mine just because I love watching Richard. He's just so much fun. And maybe one day I will publish that essay I've written about Richard II, but, you know, that's something I don't like, or that's something that I believe is poorly made and poorly written because it promotes toxic ideals. But I still enjoy it, and I'm not a bad person for enjoying that, even if it is just like a little bit of a... I won't say... I guess it's just a sort of self-indulgent for me. It's entirely self-indulgent, but I still like it, and, you know... I like a lot of music that's bad, and that's, you know, kind of... arguably kind of misogynist and just porny, but it's like...
Yeah.
I'm not a bad person for liking that, it's just a little self-indulgent.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's all I wanted to say about Rorschach and Alan Moore fans, Alan Moore purists.
Yeah, actually, while you were talking about that, I got curious as to what Alan Moore looked like, so I looked up these pictures. It's like, my goodness, he looks like a Lord of the Rings character.
Exactly.
I mean, he's totally rocking that look, but it's just...
Looks like he's about to seize the means of production. Batman.
I would now like to introduce you to our new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, Gandalf. You shall not pass! Well, that's a little harsh. Classes haven't even started yet.
Exactly.
But anyways, if that, I
Alright.
think that was our last point. We've been
I think that's the last point. Yeah, I think that's it.
We've been talking for like 4 hours.
Yes.
I've been looking at the videos like it's 4 hours and 5 minutes. I'm probably gonna edit it down to shorter because, you know, for the times I went to the bathroom and when our internet was down, because that's including that. But yeah, I think we've finally gotten through everything. So
Alright.
yeah, final thoughts. It's a good book. It's got its flaws, but I think you should if you're a fan of comics, I think you should definitely read it. Probably not your first comic. Definitely.
Yeah, I wouldn't say the first comic.
Yeah, definitely read some different comics before you read this one, because this is like very heavy. And it's also
Comic should be Batman Hush.
I don't know that one. It's also just it's a slow read. I didn't mention this earlier, but there's a lot of panels and there's a lot of text in each panel. And so that it took me a while to read. Whereas with most of my other comics, I can like fly by them in like a day or two, which is something I kind of appreciate. Like, I know we're supposed to savor each sentence, but it's like, I've got an excellent memory. I don't need to do that.
Yeah.
And I own these things, so if I forget something, I can go back. So yeah, your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are that Watchmen is a great graphic novel, and that the movie is good, and that I don't like the HBO series, and Rorschach is bae, and that's all I gotta say about that.
You're gay for Rorschach.
Which is probably why Rorschach would kill me. Anyway, that's the podcast.
Yeah, that's the comic book.
Thank you for tuning in and listening to us ramble about stuff. And we will see you next time.
Yeah, next time, I've already mentioned this several times, but next time we're going to be doing Jessica Jones' Alias, the first 4 volumes. And we're going to have fun with that one. That one's definitely a lot more lighter. I mean, it's still dark, but it's definitely a lot lighter. So, I'm Octavia.
I am the Weasel.
And we will see you next time. Have a lovely night.
I'm going to go play some Halo.